Chapter 13-16. Letting the demons from the Ten Kings Palace protect Alex and Irina was indeed putting them in a difficult position. After all, the demons from the Ten Kings Palace didn't even dare to step out when the two of them were wreaking havoc on this island back then. We are experiencing life now, after all. It's better to keep a low profile. Meg smiled. The 10 great demon tribes didn't station any 10th-tier powerhouses on this island. At most, there were 2 or 3 9th-tier demons on duty. Irina alone could wipe them out 100 times. All right. Irina nodded. Pretending to be weak was such a boring thing to do. The Ten Kings Palace was located at the center of Carapace Island. It occupied a large area, and built 10 palaces of different styles to display the might and prestige of the 10 great demon tribes. There were quite a number of demons applying for protective amulets. There were 6 long lines in front of the palace. Meg observed for a while, and chose the line that moved the fastest. The beautiful Irina and the adorable Amy quickly attracted the attention of many demons. Such beautiful female demons were extremely rare on Carapace Island. Those coquettish succubi couldn't even compare to 1% of her beauty. That little demon was also very adorable. As for Meg, he had a full beard, and his physique was very small and skinny among demons. He didn't look like he was from a powerful demon tribe, so he was directly ignored. Hey, pretty girl, have a drink with your big brother later. A 2-meter-tall iron-armored demon with bulging muscles and a layer of steel-like carapace standing in the next line chuckled as he looked at Irina. His hand even reached for Irina, wanting to embrace her. All the demons watched this scene excitedly. Many of them were even eager to try. Wasn't this the most exciting and interesting thing on Carapace Island? Useless male demons couldn't protect beautiful female demons. A cold glint flashed across Irina's eyes. Smack! Right at this moment, a pair of hands grabbed the iron-armored demon's wrist. The armored demon looked at Meg, who was grabbing his wrist, in surprise. This short and thin demon dared to resist him. Moreover, his strength was not small. He was actually able to grab his hand. Why are you wearing Pinru's clothes? Meg frowned as he looked at the level 6 mutated magical beast. I don't know what you're talking about, but since you don't have a protective amulet, I don't mind killing you. From today onwards, your wife and daughter are mine. The armored demon grinned. His other hand was already clenched into a fist, ready to punch this guy's head. The eyes of the surrounding demons lit up. If that was the case, they might have a chance to get a piece of the pie. If that's the case, it won't be a problem for me to beat you to death. Meg was deep in thought. This was really a good rule. Kill me. You will never have such a chance. The armored demon laughed maniacally as he threw a punch at Mag Paw. The iron fist that was the size of a sandbag was caught by a much smaller lobster pincer. The armored demon was stunned as he looked at the lobster pincer and Meg in disbelief. His punch was actually caught. The other demons were also slightly shocked. A level 6 iron-armored demon was already considered a powerhouse on Carapace Island. They didn't expect this ordinary-looking demon to be able to take his punch. You have to be more respectful to women, especially my woman, Meg said seriously to the armored demon. Bang! A pincer was stuffed into the armored demon's mouth just as he opened it. The punch sent him flying 100 meters away, and he landed on the ground with a loud crash. His armor shattered into pieces, and he didn't even have the chance to twitch. SSS. All the demons gasped as they looked at Meg in a different light. He killed a level 6 demon with one punch. This was a ruthless demon. And his strength was so terrifying. Why bother? Meg put away the pincer that he had custom-made from the system and sighed softly. He only wanted to be protected by the demons in a low-profile manner, but his strength didn't allow him to do so. Meg's gaze swept across the surrounding demons, and they all looked away or lowered their heads. They also carefully hid the little thoughts that they had previously. They could only live longer if they followed their hearts. This was the rule of survival for demons. Humph, Irina snorted softly. If Meg hadn't made the first move, she would have used the holy light to clean up all these dregs. As for the 10 Kings Palace, she didn't mind tearing it down again if that shabby house was built again. A demon was killed in front of the 10 Kings Palace, but it didn't cause too much of a commotion. Only 2 demons with the 10 Kings Palace badge came out from the 10 Kings Palace. After checking the armored demon's body and confirming that there was no protective amulet, they casually asked 2 demons to dispose of the broken body. That armor was a decent material that could be sold for money after being disposed of. Therefore, many demons were willing to do this. Looking at this scene, Meg had a clearer understanding of the cruelty of Carapace Island. After such a small commotion, no demons dared to find trouble with Meg and the others anymore. Because it was a protective amulet for a shop, it was 10 times more expensive than a normal protective amulet. It was 5,000 copper coins a month. This is really a good business. Meg weighed the protective amulet in his hand. Just the protection provided by the 10 Kings Palace was able to earn a lot of money from Carapace Island every year. Chase them away. We can do this business too. Irina was eager to give it a try. Compared to opening a restaurant, she was more interested in this way of earning money. Keep a low profile, keep a low profile. Meg helplessly pulled Irina away from the vicinity of the 10 Kings Palace. Meg was also a little helpless against her desire to create big trouble. After asking the demons for directions, Meg quickly found the house that he had just bought today. The house was located in the northwest of Carapace Island. If the center of the island was the first ring, and the periphery of the island was the 5th ring, then his house should be around the 3rd ring. It faced a street that wasn't too bustling. There were a few shops scattered around, and there were very few pedestrians. However, just like what the Minotaur demon had said, this house was big enough. It took up about 300 square meters, and it was a 2-story shell house with a small garden in front. It met his requirements. However, the house looked very old and dilapidated. The yard was also overgrown with weeds, and it looked like it had been abandoned for a long time. Although it's a shell house, are we really going to stay here tonight? I see a lot of bugs, Amy said worriedly as she tiptoed to look into the house. It's all right, Father will turn it into a new house. Meg said with a smile. He looked around and saw that there was no one in the neighbor's house, so he clicked to summon the mobile restaurant. Chapter 13-17. When some things were difficult to explain, choosing to remain mysterious was a very wise choice. Therefore, Meg covered Irina's eyes and made Amy obediently close her eyes while counting down from 10. 10, 9, 8, as Amy's tender voice rang out, the mobile restaurant descended from the sky. Accompanied by a series of soft noises and slight tremors on the ground, the original house was pressed into the ground and became a stable foundation. Meg let go of the hand covering Irina's eyes and said with a smile, "All right, let's take a look at our new house." Irina and Amy opened their eyes at the same time. Their eyes lit up when they saw the big house that was completely covered in white and silver seashells. Wow, what a beautiful house. It's really all seashells. Amy exclaimed in surprise. The original rundown house had disappeared and was replaced by a brand new house. Although Irina was already used to Meg's various strange abilities, she was still pleasantly surprised when she saw this beautiful seashells house. The first floor of the 2-story house still seemed to be the restaurant. Through the open door, they could see the neatly arranged tables and chairs inside. There was also a large empty space in front of the house that was surrounded by wooden railings. The ground was covered with seashells and round stones, and there were more than 20 tables scattered around. There was an empty space in the middle of the empty space, and it was unknown what it was used for. "Let's go in and take a look at our new house." Meg held Amy's hand, pushed open the small door, and walked in. In order to be as low-key as possible, Meg chose a more ordinary Carapace Island style when he chose the decoration style. It was very common white seashells with some light gold and light silver seashells in between. It was just that the system had arranged them in a very delicate way, making the overall style look very comfortable. The interior of the restaurant was also more spacious. There were fewer partitions, and black stone tables and chairs were arranged neatly in the style of a food stall. The layout of the kitchen was also very simple. The most conspicuous thing was the 3 large iron pots with a diameter of 2 meters in the middle of the dining room. They took up most of the space in the kitchen, but there was also a set of normal kitchenware and stove. As a single lobster was too big, and in order to complete the mission of catching 300,000 crayfish as soon as possible, Meg had to increase the amount of food he cooked every day. A normal-sized pot could no longer satisfy his needs. However, Meg had no idea how to use the 2-meter wok. He could foresee that there would be a tough battle tonight in the test field for the god of cooking. There was a large fish tank in the corner. There were already dozens of crayfish inside. Meg had caught them from the system's farm in the morning. He casually threw the 2 crayfish he had just bought into the fish tank. Ugly Duckling squatted in front of the fish tank and looked at the crayfish warily. It reached out its chubby little paw and knocked on the fish tank tentatively before quickly retracting its paw. It seemed to have been traumatized by being knocked unconscious in the morning. "Wow, this new home is so nice," Amy said happily as she ran around the restaurant and fiddled with the seashell wind chime hanging at the door. She listened to the crisp sound of the wind chime and said happily, "You've been busy the whole morning. Why don't you go upstairs and take a nap?" Meg said as he came out of the kitchen and looked at Amy, who was starting to get sleepy after playing with the wind chimes for a while, and Irina, who looked tired. Irina nodded slightly. "Father, I want a hug." Amy, who was sitting at the door of the dining room, raised her 2 little hands, squinted her eyes, and pouted. "Okay, Father will carry you upstairs to take a nap." Meg walked over with a smile and bent down to carry Amy up gently. "Hee, Father is so nice." Amy opened her eyes and kissed Meg's cheek. "I want one too." Irina moved her face closer. "Okay." Amy pouted her little mouth and kissed Irina's cheek too. A smile appeared on Irina's face. "Let's go," Meg said with a smile as he carried Amy up the stairs at the side of the kitchen. The stairs were also covered with seashells, but they were made of more luxurious queen shells, which had a more delicate and soft luster. The overall style was more pinkish-white, and it looked fresh and princess-like. Meanwhile, the floor of the second floor had an overall marine color scheme. He didn't know what technology the system used, but the floor looked like real flowing seawater, and he could even see seaweed and undersea plants, making him feel as if he was in an ocean world. "It's the sea." Amy took the initiative to jump down from Meg's arms. She stepped on the floor barefoot, rushed forward a few steps, and threw herself onto the floor, sliding across the floor like a fish. Ugly Duckling, who had followed them upstairs, immediately jumped onto Meg's feet and hugged Meg's thigh with its chubby little paws. It lowered its head and looked at the floor, trembling a little. "When did you prepare all these things?" Irina asked Meg with a smile. "When you were asleep," Meg said with a smile. Looking at her, she seemed to be quite satisfied with this house. Your mouth is getting sweeter and sweeter. Have you said the same thing to other women?" Irina's gaze became a little more scrutinizing. Meg smiled, and asked in return, apart from you, who would dare to accept it? That's true. The little bitches who dared to accept it are all dead. Irina looked at her own hand, and her slender fingers slowly clenched into a delicate fist. She looked at Meg with a smile, and said, right? Yes. Meg nodded in agreement. If this fist landed, everyone would die, including him. There were 3 rooms on the 2nd floor. Amy and Irina shared one room, Meg had his own room, and a small study. Irina brought Amy to sleep. Ugly Duckling, whose status in the family had deteriorated, had lost the right to sleep on the bed. It could only lie on the cushion at the end of the bed, and call out to Meg, who was at the door, resentfully. Meg looked at it sympathetically. What could he do? He didn't even have the right to sleep in this room now. Mr. Mac, isn't this too much? He didn't even write down the return time for this trip. Harrison looked at the notice hanging at the door of the restaurant and sighed. Mr. Mac, you're such a heartless man. Without tofu pudding, how am I going to maintain my youth and beauty? How am I going to keep those men's hearts? A gorgeously dressed succubus wiped the corners of her eyes with a silk handkerchief, and her expression was full of resentment. My hair is only half grown out, and Mr. Mac left just like that. What am I going to do? Chris, the boss of Broad Employment Agency, touched his hair, which had already grown into a ringed island, and looked worried. Be satisfied. At least we can still eat lean pork and century egg porridge, beef kebabs, and hot pot. At the door of Mamie's, the customers who came at noon and couldn't even enter the restaurant because of Meg's departure were complaining. Boss, Mr. Mac is out. What should we do? Keel said to Sargeras. The demons of the Burning Legion, which had already expanded to more than 60 people, all looked at Sargeras. Mr. Mac's absence meant that they wouldn't be able to eat the holy Ruggiamo. A saint like Mr. Mac needs to go out occasionally to seek inspiration. We have to be considerate of him, Sargeras said with a serious expression. However, he also couldn't hide the disappointment in his eyes. After thinking for a while, he said, let's take this opportunity to go back to the Demon Islands. We received news from our tribe yesterday that some ignorant bastards came looking for our tribe. We should let them know that we lava demons are not to be trifled with. Bookhouse Reading Website. Chapter 13-18. Since when did this house become so new? And there are so many dining tables. Ivan, the rock troll, who had just returned from quarrying rocks, stared at the brand new house next door and the tables and chairs in the courtyard with a look of astonishment. Maybe we have a new neighbor. This house has been abandoned for a long time. I wonder who moved in. Ivan's wife, Gamina, was also looking at the courtyard with a huge sea turtle in her hand. Forget it. Anyway, we don't have the tradition of greeting our neighbors on this island. If it's a neighbor with a bad personality, he might even get us into trouble. Ivan shook his head, and strode towards his own courtyard. That's true. Gamina nodded, and followed Ivan into the house. Hearing the sound of the door opening, a little rock troll ran out of the house recklessly. His clumsy rock legs didn't manage to cross the threshold, and he fell to the ground with a thud, creating a hole in the ground. He got up unscathed, and looked at the huge sea turtle in Gamina's hand with disappointment. It's a huge sea turtle again. It's a huge sea turtle every day. We're going to become a huge sea turtle from eating so much. Ivan reached out to stroke that little demon's head, and said, Justin, Father will buy you other delicious food tomorrow. Let's eat the sea turtle today first. The sea turtle that your mother makes is delicious. One huge sea turtle is enough for us to eat for a day. That's what you said yesterday and the day before yesterday, but we still eat turtles every day, and it's always turtle stew for the entire day. I might as well eat rocks. Justin snorted and grumbled. Ivan's expression froze, and guilt flashed across his eyes. He glanced at Gamina and stammered, not knowing how to answer. Gamina only knew how to make sea turtle stew. What could he do? He was in despair, too. Why, Justin? Do you think the sea turtle that I make isn't delicious? Gamina's expression turned cold, and she stared at Justin with her brownish-green eyes. Justin, who was initially aggressive, cowered instantly. He avoided her gaze, and meekly said, "And no, Mother. I just think that we can change to something else to eat, or go out for a meal, eat something else." Go out for a meal. Was there anything more delicious than turtle stew in this world? Is there anyone with better culinary skills than me? Gamina had a ridiculous expression as she turned to look at Ivan. Tell me, is there? Ivan felt the stare of death. Even if his conscience hurt, he still shook his head firmly and said, "No. Father, you traitor." Justin looked at Ivan with some disdain. He was the one who suggested that Ivan do this yesterday, but when it came to it, Ivan actually backed down. Did you see that? Even your knowledgeable father said no. A smug smile appeared on Gamina's face. She placed the giant turtle in her hands on the ground, and commanded, "Go, take out the big pot. I'm going to show my true culinary skills and stew a pot of delicious turtle for you." Ivan and Justin, who had failed in their resistance, could only helplessly walk into the house. Soon, they came out with a large pot. There was a simple stove built with 3 large rocks in the middle of the yard. "Let's have grilled fish and grilled prawns tonight." Right at this moment, a voice came from the yard next door. Meg walked out with a grill, and placed it on the empty space in the middle of the yard as he spoke to Irina and Amy, who were carrying the ingredients. "I want to eat meat, grilled meat, grilled meat," Amy said as she raised her little hand. Meow, ugly duckling, who was squatting by Amy's feet, raised its little paw in agreement. "All right, then I'll go and prepare some beef kebabs later." Meg nodded with a smile. The theme of tonight's dinner was an outdoor barbecue. This made him feel a little regretful that he didn't choose a house by the sea. After all, it would definitely be more comfortable to have a barbecue facing the sea. It's the new neighbors. Hearing the sound from the yard next door, the family of rock trolls who were busy lighting the fire all stood up, and looked towards the yard next door curiously. Ivan and Gamina were over 3 meters tall. Even the little fellow, Justin, was 1.5 meters tall. The railing that was over 1 meter tall couldn't block their vision at all. A young strange demon, a beautiful female demon, and a cute and petite little demon. This family of 3 should be the new neighbors who had just moved in today. However, Ivan and Justin's eyes were completely attracted by the big prawns and big fish on the table at the side. The fish and prawns that were marinated with seasoning gave off the fragrance of spices even before they were cooked. This was a fatal temptation to families who only had salt as their daily condiment. Meg also noticed the 3 rock trolls standing in the yard next door. He smiled and said, "Hello, we just moved in today." "Hello, I'm Gamina." "This is Ivan and this is our child, Justin," Gamina replied. She also introduced her family at the same time. This new neighbor seemed to be quite easy to get along with. "I'm Hades. This is my wife, Irina, and this is our child, Amy." Meg also introduced himself with a smile. The first step of integrating into Carapace Island was to establish a friendly relationship with the neighbors. "Hello, everyone." Amy waved her little hand at everyone. "So cute." Ivan's and Gamina's eyes lit up. They looked at Justin again, and the 2 of them looked at each other as if they had reached some kind of consensus. It seemed like they had to make another daughter. After greeting each other, the rock trolls continued to cook, and didn't interact much with Meg and the rest. On Carapace Island, demons wouldn't casually trust any other demons other than their family members. Mother, I saw that their plates are filled with big fish and prawns. They look delicious, Justin said after swallowing his saliva. Ivan was secretly observing their expressions at the side. Gamina smiled with disdain and said, what's so good about those things? They only have a fishy smell when they're stewed. Only the sea turtle is the most delicious. They'll definitely be envious when I'm done stewing the soup later. Justin and Ivan looked at each other. We don't know if our neighbor's fish and prawns will be better than the sea turtle stew. We don't dare to say, and we don't dare to ask. After washing the sea turtle, Gamina threw it into a pot of clear water, sprinkled a handful of natural sea salt, and covered the pot with a lid. Then, she clapped her hands with a relaxed expression. Now, they just had to wait for the delicacy to come out of the pot. Among the rock trolls, only a smart and virtuous female demon like her could master such a perfect and complicated method of stewing turtles. Many of their clansmen were still eating rocks. Meanwhile, Meg next door had also finished burning the fruit charcoal with Amy's help. He applied a layer of oil to the barbecue rack, and then placed the marinated fish on the rack. Sizzle. With a beautiful sound, the skin of the fish sizzled with oil. The aroma of the fish meat and the fragrance of the spices started to spread gradually, and floated to the yard next door. Chapter 13:19. Gulp. 3 gulping sounds sounded almost at the same time. This is too fragrant, isn't it? Ivan, who was sitting in front of the stove, couldn't help but look into the courtyard next door. This was an aroma he had never smelled before. It was his first time knowing that food could give off such a wonderful aroma. It was countless times more delicious than the fragrant soil in the backyard. Smells so good. It really smells so good. Justin had already climbed up from the ground, and was holding onto the railing as he looked into the courtyard next door. That male demon was flipping the big fish on the grill. He had a brush in his hand, and was brushing something onto the fish. After a while, he took a small jar and sprinkled some powdery substance onto the fish. It was as if he had injected a soul into it, and the aroma of the fish was instantly stimulated. "Wow!" Justin cried on the spot. He hugged the railing and turned to Gamina as he cried, "Mother, I want to eat that too." Meg, who put down the cumin powdered jar, turned around in surprise. He didn't expect the kid next door to really cry because of his craving. Wow, the little brother next door is craving for it. But this grilled fish is ours. Amy sat on a chair at the side, and declared her ownership with a serious expression. Meow. Ugly Duckling meowed to show its agreement. What are you thinking about? Don't you feel embarrassed? Gamina smashed her fist on Justin's head, and directly hammered half of his head into the ground, just enough to retract his face. So cruel. Amy shrank her head, and glanced at Meg and Irina. It seemed like father and mother were really super nice to her. Sorry, my child gets hungry very quickly. Once he's hungry, he'll want to eat everything, even soil. His favorite dish is the turtle stew I made. Gamina smiled at Meg and the others, and then glanced at Ivan, who was staring at the grilled fish and swallowing his saliva. Yes, yes, yes. Our whole family loves to eat turtle stew the most. Ivan shuddered, and nodded hurriedly. It's all right. He's a child, after all. It's all the same. Meg nodded. He was amazed by his neighbor's cruel parenting style. As for whether the child really liked to eat turtle stew, he didn't know. Who said that? I hate turtle stew the most. Justin, who was squatting in the corner with his head in his hands, mumbled. His head was fine, but his heart had suffered a heavy blow. While crying, he couldn't help but look at the yard on the other side through the gap in the railing. In this world, there was indeed more delicious food than turtle stew. Could that male demon be the legendary Gourmet? How could he make such fragrant food? Meg took a plate and grilled the fish over charcoal. He sprinkled some chopped green onions on it, and the aroma of the fish immediately filled the air. It was refreshing. Come, let's eat grilled fish first. Meg placed the grilled fish in front of Amy and Irina, and then changed the grilling plate. He brushed some oil on it, and placed the big lobsters with a cut on their backs on the grill. The pincers were still moving slightly, but the sauce had already seeped in perfectly, ensuring the meat quality and the wonderful taste at the same time. Under the grilling of the charcoal fire, the dark green shell of the lobster gradually turned red. The fat in the shell of the lobster started to sizzle, and the fresh taste that belonged to the lobster blossomed. Meg used the strategy of reducing the oil when grilling the lobsters. The plump lobster meat contained a lot of water, and as the water evaporated, a gap appeared between the meat and the shell. The sauce that was marinated previously had already been perfectly absorbed into the meat, and the aroma filled the air. This is too tempting. I really want to eat it. Justin stood up again at some point, and hugged the pillar in the corner. He choked with sobs, and his eyes were full of yearning. Oh, it's so delicious. Amy picked up a piece of fish and blew on it before putting it into her mouth. She then shook her head with elation. Irina also picked up a piece of fish and put it into her mouth. It was a little different from the spicy grilled fish she had at the restaurant. This grilled fish was a little simpler, and there were no side dishes. The crispy fish skin wrapped around the tender flesh of the fish, and a crispy flavor blossomed in her mouth. The tender flesh of the fish was a wonderful surprise. The unique aroma of the fruit charcoal grilled fish gave it a special temperament. Compared to the spicy grilled fish, the cumin aroma of this grilled fish was a little more prominent. However, it didn't overpower the aroma of the fish itself, and it still achieved a perfect balance. It's a little different from the grilled fish from before, but it's still very delicious. Irina picked up another piece of grilled fish. Freshly grilled fish was undoubtedly the most delicious. That's too much. She's actually enjoying it so much. Justin's tears began to flow uncontrollably again. This was the life he yearned for. Don't cry, don't cry. Isn't the turtle stew going to be ready soon? I know you want to eat the turtle stew. Just wait a little longer. Do you have to cry so sadly? Gamina pulled Justin back, and pressed him against the stove as she consoled him. Why can't I tell the truth? Justin pouted with grievance. When did he say he liked to eat turtle stew? Hold it in. Gamina glared at him. This concerned the dignity and status of a housewife. She definitely couldn't let anyone threaten or shake her position in this family. Moreover, she still insisted that the turtle stew she made was the most delicious food in the world. What kind of delicious food could a clumsy male demon make? Father. Justin looked at Ivan. Look at this bowl. It's big and round, Ivan said with a silly smile as he picked up a big bowl of freestyle. Justin sighed. Forget it. He had never been able to count on his father. Try the grilled crayfish for the first time today. Meg placed 3 freshly grilled crayfish on the table. The aroma of the grilled crayfish wafted over along with the heat. Irina and Amy, who were immersed in the deliciousness of the grilled fish, couldn't help but raise their heads. It smells so good. Amy's eyes lit up as she looked at the grilled crayfish that Meg placed in front of her. She reached out to grab the big red pincers. The pincers are still very hot now. Let's eat the body of the crayfish first. Meg hurriedly stopped her. He used the table knife to gently cut the crayfish shell on both sides, and the shrunken crayfish meat was easily picked up by Meg with a fork. Even though the meat had shrunk, it was still as thick as Amy's wrist. Wow! What a big piece of meat. Amy's eyes lit up. She took the fork with both hands and blew on it before taking a big bite. "Es delicious," Amy mumbled as she breathed out hot air. Her little face was filled with a blissful smile. At this moment, Gamina's turtle stew was also done. She got up and scooped up some of the smell with her hands to sniff it before removing the lid. A whole giant turtle was floating on the thick white soup. The hot air together with a hint of fishy smell wafted over. Chapter 13:20. Really? Justin, who was already holding a big bowl of turtle stew for the night, jumped up immediately. He looked at the roasted red prawn in Meg's hand in surprise. The wonderful aroma wafted over at such a close distance, and made him so touched that he wanted to cry. Ivan's eyes lit up, too. However, after taking a look at Gamina, he suppressed the urge to get up, but his gaze was fixed on the crayfish. Is this fellow here to cause trouble? Gamina looked at Meg. His act of delivering food was obviously a challenge to her position in this family. Moreover, he was using the method she was most proud of, cooking. Oh, I see. Thank you so much. My child is just a glutton. Gamina took the crayfish from Meg with a smile, and continued, my turtle stew is also just done. Don't be in a hurry to go back. I'll get a bowl for each of you. Meg took a look at the giant turtle with its belly facing the sky floating in the pot of soup. He couldn't even see any spices, and the scene was extremely tragic. He hurriedly waved his hand with a smile, and said, it's all right. You guys have just started eating. We're almost done. How can I do that? My turtle stew is the best in the tribe. You guys must try it, Gamina said as she scooped up the giant turtle, and was about to tear off its legs. In that case, please give us a bowl of soup. Tonight's dinner is a little dry. It would be great if we could drink some soup, Mag quickly said. He could forget about the rough turtle shredding. I'll get you some soup. Ivan got up and scooped a big bowl of soup for Meg, and passed it to Meg. Thank you. Enjoy your meal. Meg hurriedly returned with a big bowl of soup. This is. Irina looked at the big bowl Meg brought back, and was a little puzzled. Passionate neighbors. Meg shrugged. The turtle soup was very fresh and thick, but at the same time, it was accompanied by a fishy smell. It was probably because the blood was not cleaned properly when it was drained, and the appropriate spices were not added to remove the fishy smell. It was a waste of a good pot of soup. However, she had good intentions after all, and Mag could also feel Gamina's confidence and strong desire to challenge him. Hence, he still took 3 small bowls, and scooped a small bowl for each of them from the big bowl. Try it. Meg picked up the spoon and took a sip. The soup was very fresh and strong. Even if only a handful of sea salt was added, the turtle still managed to bring out the layers of the soup. However, the fishy taste was also present. It was not the kind that was hard to swallow, but for Meg, this was obviously not a soup that he would drink a second time, so he put down the spoon. It's quite good. It's even better when paired with fish meat. Amy ate a mouthful of soup and a piece of grilled fish very happily. Irina only took a whiff, and then moved the bowl to the side. She took a bite of the prawn, and said, the cooking skills of the rock trolls are indeed as rumored. However, compared to their traditional famous dish, stone mixed with sand, those who can make it to this standard should already be considered culinary geniuses in their race. There's such a famous dish. Meg was speechless. He thought that stargazy pie was already a representative of dark cuisine. Mudslide feast, stone feast, stewed small stones. There are countless representative dishes. It's just that ordinary people are not used to eating them. Irina nodded. What a strong race. Meg was in awe. A race that could play so many tricks on eating dirt must have a place in this world. Their race is almost extinct. Eating rocks causes indigestion and choking to death. The proportion of rock trolls is extremely high. Irina pursed her lips. Meg, on the other side, Justin placed the grilled crayfish on the stone table. After swallowing his saliva countless times, he rubbed his hands, and prepared to eat this tempting little fellow. It was his first time seeing food that emitted such a wonderful aroma. Clang! A big bowl of turtle stew was placed in front of him. The turtle that died with its eyes wide open stuck its head out, and stared at him. Gamina looked at Justin affectionately, and said, "Your loving mother personally made you this delicious turtle stew after a tiring day, or this crayfish that another man casually made. Which do you choose?" Justin's eyes were filled with hot tears. He stretched out his trembling hand, and pointed at the crayfish firmly. "I choose him. Eat shit, you piece of shit." Gamina pressed Justin's head into the table with one hand, and then looked at Ivan with a cold gaze. Ivan quickly picked up the big bowl in front of him, and took a bite of the giant turtle's leg. He chewed and swallowed the meat along with the bones, and nodded with a silly smile. "This turtle stew is really delicious today. Eat slowly. There's still more in the pot." Gamina finally smiled, and tore off another turtle's leg for Ivan. "Honey, you eat too. You've worked hard today." Ivan quickly scooped a bowl of turtle stew for Gamina, and tore off a big piece of meat to put in her bowl as he fawned over her. Justin, whose face was a little swollen, propped his hands on the table, and pulled his head out of the table again. He looked at Ivan with disdain, and then at Gamina carefully. He picked up the big bowl in front of him, and finished the soup in a few gulps. Then, he chewed and swallowed the turtle's head and a big piece of turtle meat before saying, "Can I eat now?" "Eat. You'll only understand how delicious my turtle stew is after you've eaten something made by others," Gamina said with a relaxed expression, and looked very confident. Ivan also put down the bowl in his hand slowly, and swallowed his saliva as he looked at the crayfish. "That's great." Justin's eyes lit up. He tore off a big pincer, and put it in front of his nose to sniff it. Even the pincer gave off a wonderful fragrance. Crack! His hard teeth crushed the shell instantly. The crispy texture was even more wonderful than the hard stone. What was even more peculiar was that there was actually plump and soft meat inside the crispy shell. The freshness of the meat blossomed instantly, and it was as if countless fireworks were blossoming on his taste buds, making Justin's smile blossom like a flower. "Oh my God! There's actually such delicious food in this world. It's simply unbelievable." Justin already didn't know how to describe this delicacy, because he had never tasted food that was close to this delicacy. In his diet, there was only turtle stew every day. Is it really that delicious? You're lying, aren't you? Ivan tore off another pincer with a look of disbelief, and then put it in his mouth to crush it. Wow! Ivan stood up with a whoosh. The crispy prawn shell was easily crushed by him. The wonderful taste made him unable to control his expression and body. This was completely beyond his imagination. In his mind, a giant turtle was swimming freely. Suddenly, a giant pincer fell from the sky, and clamped the giant turtle into two with a crack. Then, a giant red crayfish slowly appeared, and occupied the entire sea. Gamina, who was originally full of confidence, froze when she saw the father and son who suddenly fell into a state of bliss. She looked at the big crayfish with suspicion. Is it really that delicious? Or are they acting me? Chapter 13:21. I seem to have seen the beauty of a demon's life in this crayfish, Justin said with his eyes wide open. Then, he reached out to break off the crayfish's head, and took a bite of the shiny crayfish brain. The fragrant crayfish butter filled his mouth, and sent his taste buds into a frenzy again. He didn't even let go of the crayfish shell. Tuck, tuck, tuck. With a series of tremors, a layer of gray rock on the surface of Justin's body fell off, and revealed a new grayish-black stone shell. He succeeded in his first evolution. Gamina, who wanted to give Justin a big slap, looked at Justin's new stone shell in astonishment. There was even a tinge of red in the grayish-black stone shell. He really changed his shell. Ivan, who was reaching out his hand, was also stunned. He also looked at Justin in surprise. He was only 10 years old. According to convention, rock demons would only change their shells for the first time when they were 15 years old. Only a few geniuses would change their shells earlier. Changing my shell. Justin didn't quite understand the meaning behind this. He clapped his hands to get rid of the mud powder, and reached out for the crayfish again. This crayfish was simply too delicious. It was such a blissful life to be able to eat such delicious food. It would be great if he could continue to be blissful. Could it be related to this crayfish? Gamina and Ivan looked at each other. They were very clear about Justin's talent. Both of them only changed their stone shells for the first time when they were 15 or 16 years old. Their talent was very mediocre, and Justin didn't show any special talent since he was young. He was even clumsier than other children, so he couldn't be a genius. Then, the only explanation was this crayfish that the new neighbor next door gave him. They wouldn't believe that Justin suddenly changed his shell after eating a pincer and a crayfish skull had nothing to do with it. Mother, you should try it too. This grilled crayfish is really delicious. Justin broke off a piece of the fattest crayfish meat, and brought it to Gamina's mouth. The fragrance of the crayfish meat wafted over at close range, and brought about endless temptation. Gamina, who wanted to push the crayfish meat away, opened her mouth involuntarily. When the plump crayfish meat entered her mouth, her teeth that could easily crush rocks felt a special springiness. With a gentle bite, the fresh taste blossomed in her mouth. Her clumsy taste buds became unusually active, as if they wanted to taste every single taste and crazily catered to the blossoming of taste. This taste. How can there be such a wonderful taste in this world? Gamina was shocked. The image of the giant sea turtle in her mind was crushed into a thin meat patty by a red lobster. Her body and mind were completely conquered by the crayfish after just one encounter. My sea turtle, the difference is too big, Gamina sighed. Compared to the crayfish, the turtle stew that she was so proud of didn't even deserve to be called food. Honey, give me another bowl of sea turtle soup. Today's soup is really delicious. I think your culinary skills have improved again, Ivan said to the disappointed Gamina as he handed over the big bowl with a chuckle. Gamina looked up at Ivan, and saw the smile on his face. She suddenly felt a lump in her throat, and jokingly scolded, "Don't you have hands? Do you still need me to scoop it for you?" However, he still scooped up a large bowl of soup for Ivan and added a large turtle leg while he was at it. "How is it, Mother? Isn't this crayfish super delicious?" Justin said to Gamina proudly. He finally proved that he was right. The food cooked by others was indeed better than his mother's. Sea turtle soup was the most disgusting thing in the world. Rascal, sea turtle soup is so delicious. There are so many demons in our tribe who are envious of it. This crayfish can only be a snack. Do you think you can eat it as a meal? Ivan slapped Justin's head and shot him a few glances. His gaze also became a little more stern. Justin's head slammed onto the table. Although it didn't hurt, tears of grievance were already welling up in his eyes. Looking at his parents who were like two mountains, he didn't dare to voice out his anger. He nodded sullenly and said, "Sea turtle soup is really delicious. Eat it." Finish the rest. Gamina reached out to touch Justin's head, and passed the remaining half of the crayfish to him. Can I go on my way after I'm full? Justin asked fearfully as he held the crayfish. There must be a reason for this abnormality. The contrast in his mother's attitude was too big. You don't want to eat it, right? Gamina's face turned cold. I'll eat it. Justin stuffed the crayfish meat and shell into his mouth, and chewed with great relish. Justin finished the crayfish very quickly. He licked his hand as if he hadn't had enough. Unfortunately, there was only one crayfish, and it wasn't enough at all. Gamina grabbed Justin's hand and looked at it seriously for a while. Compared to just now, the red on the grayish-white stone shell had become clearer. It was a little like the red on the crayfish's shell. It wasn't this hard when I changed my shell for the first time. Ivan also reached out to pinch the slightly protruding stone shell on Justin's back. He suddenly retracted his hand, and said in shock, "Why does it feel a little prickly? It's also a little numb." Gamina ignored him, and instead asked Justin, do you feel anything special after changing your shell? Justin nodded, and said, what do you feel like? Feel? Justin stood up and clenched his fists. It seems like my strength has increased. Give it a try with a punch. Gamina pointed at the giant rock that was almost as tall as a human standing in the courtyard. That rock was what they used to train Justin. It was filled with holes left by his fists. Justin walked over and took a deep breath. Then, he clenched his fist and punched the rock. Crack. With a soft sound, a crack appeared on the giant rock with his fist as the center. The crack expanded rapidly, and the giant rock was split into two before crashing to the ground. How did I become so powerful? Justin looked at the giant rock that he smashed with his fist in disbelief. You have indeed reached the strength of your first shell change, and this layer of stone shell seems to have mutated a little, Ivan said with a smile as he looked at the giant rock. That's great. Our son is going to become a rare genius among the rock trolls, Gamina exclaimed in surprise. Mutated stone shells were extremely rare among the rock trolls. Once it appeared, it would leave its name in the history of the rock trolls. Genius. Justin was taken aback, and said with uncertainty, didn't you guys always say that I'm a rare idiot among the rock trolls? Could Justin's sudden evolution be related to this crayfish? Ivan raised his doubts and speculations again. That's possible. Gamina nodded. If eating turtle soup could help one evolve, then he wouldn't have waited until today to evolve. Justin said with determination, in order to verify your thoughts, I'm willing to eat crayfish every day until I'm full. Chapter 13:22. The commotion next door didn't affect Meg and the rest's mood as they ate their barbecue. However, Meg was also amazed by their neighbor's iron rod and fist education method. Luckily, that silly child could take a beating. After being urged a few times, Ivan still asked Meg, who was grilling meat, shamelessly, then. Neighbor, are you planning to open a restaurant? Yes, we're preparing to open for business tomorrow, Meg replied with a smile. Then are the grilled crayfish for sale? Ivan asked hesitantly. Meg shook his head, and said, I don't think the grilled crayfish is for sale anymore. However, I'm opening a crayfish restaurant, and I'll be releasing crayfish of all flavors tomorrow. If you're interested, you can come and take a look tomorrow. It seemed like this neighbor was already captivated by the grilled crayfish. Perhaps he could even become the restaurant's first customer, which was very important to the restaurant. Oh, I see. All right, our family will definitely come tomorrow. Ivan nodded before retracting his head. Whether it's really effective or not, we'll know when we try it tomorrow, Ivan said to Gamina. Crayfish of all flavors. Justin had already started to drool. Howl, A howl sounded in the sky above Carapace Island at night. "It's here." Meg, who was reading in the study, got up and went to the balcony when he heard the sound. A black shadow circled in the sky, and quickly found Meg's aura. It swooped down toward the restaurant, hovered 3 meters above the restaurant, and stuck its head down to rub against Meg's face. "Aw Z, you really know the way." Meg patted Aw Z's head with a smile. He told Aw Z that he was going to Carapace Island the night before they set off, but he didn't expect it to really fly here today. "Little Aw Z, why are you here?" Irina walked out in her pajamas, and asked Aw Z with a smile. Aw Z quickly hid behind Meg, and frantically tried to please Irina through Meg. "Come here, let me touch your head." Irina waved at it. "How?" as he looked at Meg for help. Meg shrugged his shoulders. What else could he do? Even if Irina wanted to pat his head, he had to obediently stretch his head out. "Woo!" Aw Z reluctantly put its furry head in front of Irina. "It's so soft and warm." Irina reached out her hands and rubbed Aw Z's head, a happy smile on her face. Aw Z, on the other hand, rolled her eyes and looked as if she had nothing to live for. "Little Aw Z, I want to rub the dog's head too, I want to rub it too." Amy had also come upstairs at some point. She looked at Aw Z's furry head and said while jumping up and down, "Come, let's do it together." Irina lifted Amy up and gently placed her on Z's neck. Amy hugged Aw Z's neck and pressed her face against it. She smiled and said, "Little Aw Z is so warm, just like a big stove." Meow, meow. Ugly Duckling looked up at the huge purple-striped griffin with curiosity in its eyes. It looked back at its back, and was a little disappointed when it didn't have the same pair of wings. Irina and Amy only let go of Aw Z's head after they were done playing with each other. Aw Z lowered its head and stared at Ugly Duckling. It sniffed it with its nose, and then stared at the little wing-like fur on its back for a while. Suddenly, it sneered. "Meow." Ugly Duckling felt humiliated, and meowed sternly. However, its voice was still a little childish. Aw Z laughed even more happily, revealing 2 rows of sharp, white teeth. Meow, meow, meow. Ugly Duckling shrugged its back and tried to make itself fly. However, apart from its ridiculous posture, its body still stood firmly on the ground. "Ugly Duckling, you're too fat. Your wings can't let you fly anymore." Amy squatted down and touched the 2 little wings on Ugly Duckling's back. She smiled and said, "When can these wings grow out? I really like to eat wing tips." Ugly Duckling and Aw Z looked at Amy at the same time with fear in their eyes. "It's all right. I'm not going to eat you guys yet," Amy consoled them. Ugly Duckling and Aw Z backed off at the same time. This was even scarier. "Go and play. Don't go too far, and don't get discovered. Come and find us at night. I'll prepare something delicious for you." Meg smiled and patted Aw Z's head. "Howl." Aw Z meowed happily and flapped its wings to leave. Ugly Duckling looked up at Aw Z's departing figure with a little envy in its eyes. "Let's go. It's time for us to sleep." Meg watched Aw Z leave before bringing Irina and the others downstairs to sleep. Lying on the bed, Meg closed his eyes and calmed himself down very quickly. Then, he pushed open the door to the test field for the god of cookery. "Challenge it, crayfish. Host, please complete the mission of cutting the back of 100 crayfish within 10 seconds, and ensure that the crayfish meat is intact and the cut is continuous." Countdown begins. 10, 9, 8. As soon as Meg entered the test field for the god of cookery, the system's voice sounded, followed by crayfish flying all over the sky. Meg, who was still in a daze, didn't even have time to pick up the kitchen knife before the crayfish were already hanging all over his body. There were even two crawling on his face and trying to pinch his ears with their big pincers, but he cut off their pincers. Challenge failed. The countdown ended, and the system's voice also sounded. "System, what the hell is this?" Meg said with a frown as he swept the crayfish off his body. Wasn't this messing with him? Cutting the back of the crayfish is a very important step in the cooking of crayfish. How to cut the back of the crayfish elegantly without harming the meat itself is a perfect example of the perfect combination of artistry and technique. If the host wants to learn how to cook crayfish, he must first master the technique of cutting the back of the crayfish, the system replied. Then you should at least let me practice first. Who can stand to be covered with crayfish the moment I come in? Meg refused. Increasing the speed of cutting the back of the crayfish was something Meg agreed with. This was related to whether he could supply a large amount of crayfish. The second round of the challenge will begin immediately. Host, please get ready. Countdown, 10, 9. The system ignored Meg's words, and the second round of crayfish attacked again. Meg immediately raised the kitchen knife, and with his fast, accurate, and ruthless knife skills, he successfully cut the 100 crayfish into half. Challenge failed. The third round of the challenge begins. Challenge failed. Challenge failed. When the tip of the knife cuts across the back of the crayfish, I can feel the position of every joint on the shell. I know what kind of force I should use to cut open the shell. However, this process is less than 0.1 seconds. Ordinary people can't see what I did during this process. All you can see is a crayfish whose shell was perfectly cut open. The cut on the shell is smooth, and the meat is not damaged at all. Of course, you can't imagine how many crayfish died under my knife in order to do all this. Autobiography of the Master Chef. Chapter 13:23. Who is it? Which bastard stole my idol? Under the moonlight, Alfred's eyes were bloodshot as he howled at the sky on the messy island. There was no trace of the statue in the crater. Alfred walked around the island and his gaze fell on the charred body of the three-headed demon dog. He walked up to it and examined it carefully. He gritted his teeth and said, "Flaming demon tribe, I won't let you off easily. Only I deserve the power of the undead god. The statue will be reconstructed in 3 days. Before that, I have to snatch it back and complete the rest of the ceremony," Alfred said in a deep voice. Alfred said in a low voice as he summoned his flying mount. "It seems that I have to take some men to Inferno Island. They must have been ordered by Terry to come and steal from my Abyssal Island's territory." Alfred bent down and punched the ground. The entire island trembled and collapsed, sinking to the bottom of the sea. Emergency mission, host, please kill the base destroyer, Alfred, within 3 days. Mission success, receive the title of base guardian and a chance to ask a secret question. Mission failure, host will lose the supply of all ingredients from the base. Meg had just completed the 10-second open-back mission of 100 crayfish when the system's voice suddenly sounded in the test field for the god of cookery. Meg was dumbfounded. This mission came out of nowhere. Did he have to accept missions from the system in the test field for the god of cookery? System, what the hell is a base destroyer? And what's a secret question? Meg put down the kitchen knife and asked with a frown. Alfred destroyed the island structure with brute force, causing the island to collapse. It had a great impact on the crayfish breeding base's water quality and environment, destroying the ecosystem that the system had painstakingly built. For base destroyers like this, the system must eliminate them to prevent them from causing more serious damage to other bases, the system replied. Looks like he noticed that the statue is gone, Meg said thoughtfully. With the host's current authority, you don't have the right to know some secret information on this continent. However, after completing this mission, the system will provide you with a chance to ask a question. Knowledge is priceless. Then I'll change this chance to 100 copper coins. No. Look, this opportunity isn't even worth 100 coppers. Meg curled his lips. The system, you want me to kill a level 10 powerhouse, yet you're not willing to show me any sincerity. System, you're getting cocky, aren't you? Do you still remember who Daddy is? Host, please respect this system. The system said sternly. I don't care. Anyway, I can't beat him. Unless you give me a chance to return to my peak, otherwise, you want Dad to die. You can do whatever you want. Also, if you don't want to sell your vegetables to me, I'll buy them from someone else. There are so many people who grow vegetables in this world. You're not the only one. Meg said indifferently. Host, you are a scoundrel. What kind of host are you? Is there anyone who threatens the system like you? Do you know how the industry is laughing at me now? Oh, there's a circle. How do they laugh at you? Tell me and make me laugh. Meg said with great interest. The system was silent for a long time, and said in a low voice, Mission success reward weighted. The mobile restaurant can obtain a protective shield that is immune to all attacks below level 9, and can withstand 3 level 10 attacks. Mission failure punishment, obliterate the host. You didn't go to ask for help in your circle of friends just now, did you? Meg raised his eyebrows. This punishment style didn't seem like the system's style. How did you know? The system was shocked, but it stopped in time. It coughed softly and said, the 3-day countdown has begun. Host, please complete the mission as soon as possible. After that, it went completely silent. Meg thought for a while. Alfred was also on his kill list, and he was also Irina's target. Although the system's mission was a little sudden, it was not completely impossible to complete it within 3 days. The increase in the mobile restaurant's defensive ability was indeed very attractive to him. It was equivalent to having an impenetrable fortress. Even if it was a sneak attack from a level 10 powerhouse, it would give them enough time to react. It was quite practical. Looks like the assassination plan has to be pushed forward a little. Meg whispered to himself as he walked to the big pot at the side. He threw the mission to the back of his mind first, and began to practice how to make a delicious braised crayfish. Braised crayfish, spicy crayfish, steamed crayfish, garlic crayfish, 13-spice crayfish, iced crayfish. Every cooking method was a new challenge for Meg. However, Meg, who had been honed for a long time, was no longer the rookie who had no understanding of cooking. He had his own understanding of the control of the fire and the amount of spices and seasonings. The various methods were just like playing a game, and the sense of accomplishment was equally great. Congratulations, host. The supreme grade iced crayfish has been achieved. Meg opened his eyes, and the alarm clock at the bedside was ringing. After waking up for a while, Meg reached out to turn off the alarm clock. He shook his head, and chased the crayfish out of his head. He sat up and rested for a while before regaining his strength. Although it was only one night, Meg, who was in the test field for the god of cookery, had already spent over 100 days and nights. Learning the 6 cooking methods of crayfish in one go, and perfecting each one to perfection, was also a huge test for Meg. Luckily, he got more and more familiar with the crayfish, and walked out of the test field for the god of cookery at daybreak. It's a pity to do all 6 methods, and it's time-consuming and not suitable for expansion. Meg pondered for a while, and softly murmured to himself, then, let's make spicy crayfish, garlic crayfish and 13-spice crayfish. Meg couldn't stay on Carapace Island for the rest of his life, but to avoid trouble, he couldn't make the same crayfish flavor in a short period of time after he returned to Chaos City. Leaving the 3 flavors for Mamis to make was obviously a good choice. I'll have to go to the harbor to collect crayfish after breakfast. I wonder if those fishermen went to catch crayfish. Meg got out of bed, washed up, and went downstairs to make breakfast. To the fishermen on Carapace Island, this morning was a little special compared to the past. This was because there were several large red prawns in the wooden barrels in front of them. They stretched their necks and looked in the direction of the island. Their expressions were somewhat anxious and somewhat expectant. "Old man, you didn't pretend to be us with that fellow yesterday, right?" A young fisherman with 2 dark circles under his eyes asked the old fisherman, Tucker, as he held onto a big net that was filled with crayfish. There were more than 50 crayfish in it. "It's also my first time meeting that lord. Why would I pretend to be you? I was hoping that he would come today so that I could give these crayfish to him," Tucker said with annoyance. There were also 10 odd crayfish in his wooden bucket. Chapter 13:24. Because of a piece of news that spread like wildfire, many fishermen on Carapace Island didn't have a good night's sleep last night. Today, the tide had just receded, and the sky was still dark, but many fishermen had already rushed to the beach with torches to search for the dark green prawns that they had avoided previously. The price of 50 copper coins per prawn was already higher than most sea fishes and crabs. Just one prawn was enough for a family to live on for a day. If they could catch a few more, they would have enough money to buy the amulets for the month. One had to know that this kind of strange prawns had appeared quite frequently on the beach of Carapace Island recently. Therefore, every fisherman had caught quite a number of prawns in their buckets, and they were anxiously waiting for that mysterious demon to come and purchase them. If the news was fake, then their efforts this morning would have been in vain. Meg made breakfast with love for Amy and Irina calmly. Without him calling them, the 3 little gluttonous kittens had already been lured down from upstairs by the aroma. After breakfast, Meg suddenly remembered that he hadn't named the restaurant yet, so the family of 3 started a discussion about the name of the restaurant. "Let's call it IE Restaurant." Irina threw out a name as soon as the discussion started. "I think it sounds pretty good. IE. It's so cute. I like this name." Amy raised her little hand in agreement. "Meow." Ugly Duckling also raised its little paw in agreement. "Seems like I'm a man who doesn't deserve a name." Meg shrugged with a smile. The name of the restaurant was decided just like that. The system very efficiently custom-made a signboard and hung it at the door. "Let's go to the harbor to collect the crayfish. IE Crayfish Restaurant is officially opening today." Meg carried Amy, straightened her 2 pincers, and walked towards the entrance of the restaurant. "We're just going to sell crayfish here. Aren't we going to do anything else?" Irina asked as she walked beside Meg. "Let's go and kill Alfred in 2 days, Meg said with a smile. "That's interesting." Irina's eyes lit up, and she was instantly interested. Meg smiled and shook his head. What a restless woman. When they passed by an alley, Meg and the others happened to see an ugly demon pressing a thin and weak female demon to the ground. The single-horned female demon, who looked to be only 13 or 14 years old, struggled desperately, but still had no way to break free from the demon's claws. In the distance, several demons were just coldly watching this scene, and some were even laughing and watching the play. This is why I hate Carapace Island. These people are no different from wild beasts. Irina frowned slightly before kicking a flat and round rock on the ground. The stone flew into the alley, penetrating the head of the demon who was pressing down the single-horned female demon, and then circling around, cutting the throats of the demons who were watching the show. They do deserve to die. Meg reached out to block Amy's eyes, and the 3 of them passed by the alley. This kind of thing was very common on Carapace Island. Demons who didn't have the money to buy amulets could only become the vassals or prey of other demons. The single-horned demon girl was stunned when she saw the demon who suddenly collapsed on top of her. Hot blood sprayed onto her delicate face, and the strong smell of blood made her come back to her senses. She pushed that demon away in disgust and looked at the 6 or 7 demons who had collapsed in the alley. Blood gushed out from their throats as they covered their necks with their hands, and their eyes were filled with despair. The demon girl, Jane, was completely frightened. She staggered to the entrance of the alley, but after running a few steps, she stopped again and looked back at the amulet hanging on the waist of the demon who had wanted to violate her. After hesitating for a while, Jane walked back quickly. She squatted down and took off the amulet to hang on her waist. Then, she tore off a piece of cloth to cover her face. She jogged out of the alley and quickly turned into the alley next door. She staggered as she ran in the alley, as if she didn't feel anything even when her bare feet were cut open. She didn't know who saved her, but she knew that if the 10 Kings Palace found out that she had something to do with the deaths of these people, she wouldn't be far from death. She might have to experience something even more terrifying than death. The fishermen at the harbor were waiting anxiously. Many demons had already planned to throw away these prawns and go to the seaside to take a look before the tide rose. Otherwise, they would have come for nothing today. Tucker also had a worried look on his face. Although he had already received 5 gold coins from the Lord yesterday, everyone had only caught the prawns after seeing him sell them. If the Lord hadn't come, perhaps they would have vented their anger on him. He's here. He's here. The young demon at the side suddenly stood up, and his eyes lit up when he saw Meg walking over from afar. He's here. Hearing the commotion, the other fishermen also stood up. Meg looked at the fishermen on both sides of the harbor who stood up one after another as if they were welcoming him. He was a little shocked. Are these guys trying to cause trouble? Irina's eyes lit up. Although they were all small fish and prawns, there were so many of them that it would be good for them to exercise their muscles. Should we use fireballs? Or do you want to smash it with a stick? Amy asked. Calm down, they're just ordinary crayfishers. Meg quickly stopped the 2 who were about to attack. He had already noticed that the barrels and nets in front of these fishermen were mostly filled with crayfish. Lord, you're finally here. These are the crayfish I caught today to repay the money I owed you yesterday, Tucker said gratefully as he walked to Meg with his wooden barrel. Today's harvest is not bad. Meg counted. There were a total of 15 crayfish in the wooden barrel, and the barrel was almost full. He took out 25 silver coins from his money pouch and handed it to Tucker. No. No need. You helped me a lot yesterday. These extra crayfish are my thanks. Tucker quickly waved his hand. The 2 crayfish yesterday were your thanks. Today's 5 crayfish are 50 copper coins each, so it's a total of 25 silver coins. You have to accept it. Meg shook his head and smiled. This is a long-term business. You can sell me the crayfish you catch in the future. Tucker hesitated for a moment before reaching out to take the silver coins. He bowed to Meg gratefully and said, "Thank you." In just one night, he had earned more money than he could earn in a month in the past. His hand holding the silver coins was trembling slightly. The fishermen who were still doubtful at first saw the silver coins Tucker received, and their eyes lit up one after another. "Sir, look at these crayfish I caught. There's a total of 52 crayfish. If you want them all, I'll give you the price of 50 crayfish." The young fisherman Qatar came up with a big net of crayfish and looked at Meg excitedly. Meg looked at the crayfish in the net. They were quite energetic, and 52 crayfish was enough. He nodded and said, "Okay, 50 copper coins each. I'll take them all." All the fishermen were in an uproar. 50 crayfish for 50 copper coins each. That was 2,500 copper coins. This was undoubtedly a huge sum of money for these fishermen who were struggling to make ends meet. All the demons looked at Meg with their eyes lit up. Qatar took the 25 gold coins from Meg with a glowing face. This was the money he usually earned in a month. He didn't expect to earn it in one night. Happiness came too quickly. He held the gold coins up and down, and his mind was in a daze. Then Meg bought all the crayfish from the rest of the fishermen. He filled 2 specially made nets that he brought with him, and there were about 300 crayfish in them. Ding! Detected 2 seedling prawns. Crayfish capture mission progress, 2 out of 100. The system notification sounded in Meg's head. Chapter 13:25. Meg's eyes lit up. He didn't expect that there would be 2 breeding crayfish among the crayfish caught by the demon fishermen. It was a pleasant surprise. The most crucial part of the crayfish catching mission was to catch the 100 breeding crayfish. If they could catch all the breeding crayfish in advance, they wouldn't need to catch all 300,000 crayfish to complete the mission. I will purchase the crayfish at 50 copper coins per crayfish long term. If you catch any crayfish, send them directly to my restaurant. I will purchase them at 8 a.m. and 4:30 p.m. every day. I won't accept them at any other time. The address of the restaurant. Meg told the fisherman the location of the restaurant. Considering the time and effort required to go back and forth to the port to purchase the crayfish every day, he decided to let the fishermen deliver the crayfish themselves. The fishermen didn't have any objections to this. After receiving the money, they only wanted to hurry to the beach to continue looking for crayfish. The price of 50 copper coins per crayfish was enough to make the fishermen go crazy. Meg found a tall and strong demon to help carry the 300+ crayfish back. He only needed to pay 20 copper coins. Irina looked at Meg, who was pouring the crayfish into the big pond at the corner of the courtyard, and asked, "Are you going to start selling crayfish at noon today?" "Yes. I reckon there will be an endless stream of crayfish coming. If we don't do it now, we won't be able to hold it." Meg nodded. 300 crayfish occupied half of the pond. After all, each crayfish weighed 2 caddies. "Can you handle it by yourself?" Irina was a little doubtful. After all, there were so many waiters at Mamie's. "That's a problem." Meg was slightly taken aback as he looked at Irina. "I have never served anyone before. I'm afraid that I won't be able to resist taking action once they open their mouth." Irina said calmly, "But if you think I can, I don't mind giving it a try." "Forget it. You can just be the lady boss who collects money." Meg quickly rejected. With Irina's temper, if she were to take action, the restaurant would most likely be stained with blood, and the business wouldn't be able to continue. What's that?" Amy, who was running around in the courtyard with Ugly Duckling, suddenly pointed to a rock garden in another corner of the courtyard. Meg and Irina looked over at the same time, and the corner of their clothes that was exposed from behind the rock immediately shrank back. "Come out," Irina ordered coldly. After a moment of silence, a thin and weak figure stood up from the rockery. He was wearing a tattered black gown, and his face was covered with an irregular piece of black cloth. His clothes were stained with blood, and his hands were covered with mud. He was holding a sharp stone, and his whole body was trembling slightly. "She is..." Meg looked at the single-horned demon girl, feeling that she was a little familiar. "What are you doing here?" Irina coldly asked as she looked at the single-horned demon. Her gaze was also somewhat surprised. Wasn't this the demon girl she had coincidentally saved in the morning? Jane looked at Irina, and the fear in her eyes was replaced by amazement. What a beautiful demoness! She had never seen such a beautiful demon before. Even the most beautiful succubus wasn't 1/10 as beautiful as this big sister. However, she quickly came back to her senses and realized her current situation. Barging into someone else's house was punishable by death on Carapace Island. The Ten Kings Palace wouldn't care about the life and death of someone like her who had no status and wasn't from a powerful tribe. After the incident in the morning, she had been running around in a panic. When she reached the vicinity, she happened to meet the Ten Kings Palace's patrol team. In her panic, she hid in the courtyard. She had planned to leave immediately after the patrol team left, but she did not expect the owner of the house to return and discover her. I am Jane, a single-horned demon. I accidentally barged into your courtyard and offended you. I promise I have no ill intentions, please forgive my sins, Jane said as she lowered her head. The rock in her hand was still tightly clenched. If someone wanted to kill her, she had to at least put up a fight. You killed the demons. Irina looked at her and asked coldly. I didn't. Jane's face turned pale instantly. She looked at Irina's cold gaze, shook her head, and said with a sobbing tone, I didn't kill them. They wanted to violate me. I don't know who killed them. I didn't see his face, but I am very grateful to him. He saved me. It's her. Meg then recalled that this demon girl was the one that Irina saved in the morning. However, he only took a quick glance at her in the morning and didn't take a closer look. He didn't expect to see her again at home. Is killing a few demon scum something to be alarmed about? So what if you killed them? A smile appeared on Irina's face as she looked at Jane with interest. This little girl was rather interesting. Although she was pitifully weak, she wasn't an ungrateful demon. But they all had protective amulets on them. If the Ten Kings Palace found out, they wouldn't let me off, even if I didn't kill them, Jane said fearfully. To her, the Ten Kings Palace was the most terrifying and powerful force in this world. A bastard protected by a bastard. So what if you killed them? Irina shook her head. She looked at Jane and said, take off the cloth on your face and let me see. Jane wasn't used to Irina's words. The Ten Kings Palace was the absolute ruler of Carapace Island, but this beautiful big sister wasn't afraid of them at all. However, she had an inexplicable sense of trust when she looked at Irina. She hesitated for a moment before reaching out to take off the rags tied around her face. Her face was covered in blood, and there were a few small wounds, but one could still see her delicate facial features. Her medium-length silver-gray hair was also covered in blood, and there was a light golden horn in the middle of her forehead. It was about 5 centimeters long, and there was a golden-pink spiral on it. It looked very delicate. How old are you? Irina asked. 13. Is there anyone else at home? My mother passed away 10 days ago. I don't have any relatives. Are you nimble? I'm very fast at picking up seashells. Faster than anyone else. Irina nodded in satisfaction. Then, she said, very good. Then you can stay. From today onwards, you're an employee of our restaurant. We'll let you stay here, give you food, and pay you a salary. Jane and Meg were both stunned. Stay. Let me stay, and even give me food and a salary. Jane looked at Irina and felt that she had heard wrongly. Not only was this beautiful big sister not going to pursue her mistake of intruding into their house, she was even going to take her in. You're done with the recruitment just like that. Meg was also secretly speechless. As the boss, he didn't even have the chance to interrupt. His authority to speak had really dropped drastically. That's great. Then I have another big sister, Amy said happily. Chapter 13:26. Why? You don't want to. Irina frowned slightly. She felt that the conditions she offered were good enough. And no. Jane shook her head quickly. She hesitated and asked in confusion, I'm just a little confused. Why did you choose me? Because I'm too lazy to go out and find others, Irina said frankly. Jane looked at Irina and did not know how to describe her feelings at this time. Our restaurant is just about to open, but we lack a waiter. If you are willing to stay and be a waiter, we can provide you with accommodation and 3 meals, as well as an appropriate salary. Meg looked at Jane and said. Just as Irina said, he was too lazy to specially recruit people. If this demon girl was suitable, it would naturally be the best. Jane looked at Meg. Although this demon looked a little strange, his eyes were clean and clear, and he was easy to trust. And the little demon with a pair of pincers on her head was even more adorable. Such a family of 3 made her have no doubts. She hesitated and nodded. If you are willing to let me stay, Jane can't ask for anything more. But if I stay, it may bring you some trouble, Jane added quickly. She did not want to bring disaster to others because of her, just like her mother. If it was not to protect her, trouble. It doesn't exist. Irina waved her hand with a relaxed expression and looked at Jane, who was still standing in the rockery. You come out first. Jane quickly walked out from behind the rockery. Her blood-stained feet stepped on the shell ground, and there was a trace of pain on her face. However, she did not make a sound, and there was not much pain on her face. Irina glanced at Jane's feet, walked forward, and gently held her wrist. A green light entered Jane's body from her wrist. She only felt a cool feeling brushing across the surface of her body, and the wounds on her body began to heal at a speed visible to the naked eye. Let's go. I'll take you to take a bath and change your clothes. Irina let go of Jane's wrist and walked into the restaurant first. Jane came back to her senses and found that all the injuries on her feet and body had healed, and the pain was completely gone. There was only a faint pink mark left on the wound on her hand, and it was almost impossible to tell that she had been injured. Thank you. Jane was amazed by Irina's powerful healing magic and quickly thanked her. She walked a few steps to catch up with Irina. But when she reached the door of the restaurant, she stopped. Looking at the clean restaurant and then at her feet full of blood and mud, she hesitated and did not dare to step in. Wear slippers. Your feet will be more comfortable. Meg took a pair of slippers and gently placed them in front of Jane. Mopping the floor was indeed a troublesome thing, and if she stepped in directly, she would feel more pressure. Thank you. Jane bowed to Meg and carefully put her feet into the beautiful pink slippers. The soft texture was so comfortable that she was pleasantly surprised. She had never worn such comfortable shoes before. She used to wear the straw sandals woven by her mother using seaweed, and it was easy for her feet to be scratched by rocks. With clean shoes, Jane walked into the restaurant carefully. The clean and spacious restaurant with neatly arranged tables and chairs were all new to her. She had never seen such a restaurant on Carapace Island. The bathroom is upstairs, Irina said at the staircase and went upstairs first. Jane quickly retracted her gaze and caught up with Irina's footsteps. System, let's choose female clothing, Meg said in his mind as he kept the 2 nets that contained the crayfish. Host, have you decided to wear female clothing? The system's voice was tinged with excitement. I want to choose work clothes for the new employee. Meg rolled his eyes. I see. Everyone in the circle has been showing off photos of the host in female clothing. The system was a little disappointed. What the hell? Meg raised his eyebrows and felt that things weren't that simple. If the host is willing to wear female clothing, the system can provide all the female clothing choices for free and give you a makeup experience bag. The system still didn't give up. Get lost. Meg rejected coldly. Was he such a gay person? Meg chose a red and white maid's dress with short sleeves for Jane. The boundless sea realm was as warm as summer all year round, and Carapace Island was a typical tropical island. The temperature outside was over 30 degrees Celsius. He chose the maid's dress because it was relatively conservative. Keeping a low profile was the most important thing when doing business on Carapace Island. Being a little conservative could save a lot of trouble. System's preference for female clothing: 1. Maid's dress. 2. Dead swimmers. Alright, you can shut up now. Meg opened the list listed by the system and went in to take the maid's dress and black leather shoes that were delivered by the system. He went upstairs and handed them to Irina, who had just taught Jane how to use the showerhead and various toiletries. When did you prepare these clothes? Who did you prepare them for? They don't look like something that I can wear. Irina opened the maid's dress and stared at Meg. Meg felt an unusual murderous aura. He had miscalculated and didn't expect such a problem. A spark flashed through his mind, and he said with a relaxed expression, "This is the work uniform that I prepared for Mia, but it's too small, so I kept it. I don't know if it's suitable for Jane." "I see." Irina nodded and believed Meg's words. Phew. Meg turned around and sighed softly, praising himself for being quick-witted. About half an hour later, Jane came down from upstairs and walked to Meg and Irina, who were drinking tea. She looked down at her leather shoes and said softly, "Boss, Lady Boss. It fits quite well." Irina looked at the maid's dress that Jane was wearing. The size was just right, as if it was tailor-made. "Don't be too nervous. You are an employee of the restaurant. We have an employer-employee relationship, not a master-servant relationship," Meg said with a smile. After taking a shower and changing her clothes, Jane looked like a different person. She had a palm-sized face with delicate and three-dimensional facial features. Although her skin was wheat-colored due to years of exposure to the wind and sun, there were shallow sunburn spots. Her undried gray-white hair was a little wet and scattered, but she still gave off a youthful vibe. "Wow, Sister Jane is so beautiful." Amy circled around Jane and smiled. Jane looked up at Irina and Meg and smiled shyly. "Well, we will officially open for business at noon. Let's talk about your work first." Meg got up and walked to the kitchen. He quickly came out with a stack of paper and 3 lively crayfish. Chapter 13:27. The waiter's job seemed simple, but it was actually quite tedious. Especially when there was only one waiter in the restaurant, the workload was even heavier. Luckily, IE Lobster Restaurant only planned to cook crayfish, and there were only 3 flavors, so the job of ordering was relatively simple. However, Meg's plan was to blow up the entire Demon Islands and create a craze for eating crayfish. Only then could he complete the crayfish capture mission faster. First, the waiter needs to help the customers order, which is to ask them what crayfish flavor they want and how much. Meg began to teach Jane how to quickly become a qualified waiter. Order, serve, pay, clear the table. Jane had to do all this work by herself. Jane, who was originally full of confidence, gradually became nervous and anxious. "Let me collect the money. I think this should be quite interesting." Irina interrupted with an expectant smile on her face. "If someone doesn't pay up, then we'll beat them all to death." Amy remembered what she said and clenched her little fist beside her face. She said fiercely, "We're super fierce." "Yes, we're super fierce." Irina smiled and rubbed Amy's head as she nodded. "All right." Meg nodded. Meg was also extremely disgusted by those who tried to dine and dash. This was a serious disrespect for his labor. It was obviously a good choice to let Irina use violence to curb violence. It could also reduce Jane's workload. Otherwise, this little girl would most likely break down. "Jane, you need to be responsible for ordering, serving, and clearing the table. There might be more customers, so the workload will be higher. Are you sure you're okay?" Meg looked at Jane. This thin and weak body looked like it would collapse with a slight breeze, which made him a little worried. Yes, I can do it. Jane nodded, and said confidently, I'm very strong, and the talent of a horned demon is endurance. Although I look very thin, I can carry 100 kilograms of goods and run one round around Carapace Island. However, this restaurant looked like it was newly opened. Even the tables had not been used. Jane was a little puzzled. Why was the boss so confident that business would be good? It wasn't easy to do business on Carapace Island. Those demons thought they were powerful, and would often dine and dash without paying. Even a protective amulet could only guarantee that they wouldn't smash things in the shop. That's good. Meg put away the large plates that were used for training. He couldn't ask for too much from a temporary waiter. A good work attitude was the most important thing. As for the other things, he could slowly practice after he got the hang of it. Gurgle, at this moment, a series of strange noises sounded. Big Sister Jane's stomach is growling. Amy came forward and reached out to gently touch Jane's stomach. You're starving. Jane blushed and was a little embarrassed. Just in time. It's almost noon. Let's have an early lunch, and we can start work after that. Meg glanced at the clock on the wall. It was already 10:30 p.m., just the right time to make lunch. Meg made a serving of garlic crayfish for lunch. Each of them had a 1 kilogram serving of garlic crayfish. Below the crayfish were vermicelli soaked in the garlic gravy. This aroma, how can it be so tempting and wonderful? Jane sat at the table and looked at the red crayfish on the large plate in front of her. The shell was cut open from the head to the back, and a spoonful of golden garlic was drizzled in the middle of the open crayfish. The aroma wafted over, and there was nowhere to hide. She had already forgotten how many times she had secretly swallowed her saliva. Her stomach even grumbled uncontrollably, seriously protesting against her actions of not starting to appease her. Eat, don't stand on ceremony, Meg said with a smile. He skillfully twisted off the head of the crayfish and easily removed the shell that had already been split open. The finely chopped garlic turned golden after stir-frying, glowing with golden oil. It covered the crayfish butter, and together with the crayfish, it exuded a tempting aroma. Meg took a bite of the head of the crayfish. The mouthful of crayfish butter and the delicious garlic instantly activated the taste buds. The taste of the garlic was very mild. The stir-frying removed the spicy taste of the garlic, but also completely activated the rich aroma of the garlic. The delicate knife skills and precise heat control made the granules feel just right. The salty and fragrant garlic, together with the delicious crayfish brain, simply made one's soul leave the body and float into heaven. After swallowing a mouthful of crayfish butter, the aroma lingered in the mouth and teeth, and the aftertaste was endless. It's indeed the crayfish that I made. I was right to scold it back then. Meg couldn't help but praise in his heart. Only such garlic crayfish deserve to be called delicious. Host, your thoughts are very dangerous. Please show the repentance and respect that you deserve. Even if it's fake. The system's voice sounded and warned. Isn't this the truth? I feel that the crayfish that I made is more delicious than theirs. Meg said frankly with a smile. After countless days and nights in the kitchen, his thoughts were naturally different from before. After all, he was standing on the shoulders of countless chefs to learn from. Every chef who cooked seriously deserved respect. Slurp. Amy took a bite of the vermicelli and made a soft sound. After chewing and swallowing, she looked at Meg and said happily, Father, this long and bouncy noodles are so delicious. This is vermicelli, not noodles, Meg corrected with a smile. Anyway, it's super delicious. Amy was not in a hurry to eat the crayfish. Instead, she first slurped the vermicelli. The garlic vermicelli was originally a very delicious existence. Jane observed for a while how Meg and the others ate. Then, she imitated Meg and carefully grabbed the big crayfish. She broke off the head, removed the shell, and took a bite of the head. Crunch. The delicious minced garlic was already exuding a wonderful aroma in her mouth, but when her teeth bit the hard shell of the crayfish, her movements suddenly stopped. Just take a bite of the crayfish head. You don't have to eat the shell, Meg explained with a smile. Okay. Jane's cheeks quickly flushed. She answered vaguely, turned her body slightly, loosened her teeth, and took a bite. The crayfish butter and minced garlic were sucked into her mouth very easily. Oh! This taste! Jane's eyes widened, revealing an expression of disbelief. The fragrant minced garlic was the first to bloom with an incredible taste. The silent taste buds were instantly activated. At first, they were a little panicked, but they were soon conquered and began to crazily cater to the taste. Then, the delicious crayfish butter began to appear. It, which had been enhanced by the minced garlic, was the real protagonist. If she had not experienced it personally, she would never have imagined that such a delicious taste really existed. The seemingly ordinary crayfish had become such a strong delicacy in Meg's hands. Chapter 13:28. The delicious garlic crayfish paired with the garlic vermicelli was simply too blissful to eat until one was full. Jane's eyes were filled with tears of happiness as she drank the last mouthful of soup in the big bowl and burped contentedly. Sorry. Jane immediately put down the bowl and covered her mouth with a red face. Irina put down her chopsticks gracefully and asked Jane, "What's wrong with burping?" "Fairies have to fart and burp too." "Little Golden Horn, are you full?" After a discussion between Irina and Amy while Meg was cooking, they finally decided on Jane's nickname. "Yes, I'm full." Jane nodded and smiled shyly. She didn't mind the nickname Little Golden Horn at all. Instead, she liked it. Other than her mother, the other demons had never cared about her name, let alone give her an affectionate nickname. Little Golden Horn sounded even cuter than Jane. Moreover, she could feel the kindness and friendliness of Irina and Amy. Ever since her mother passed away, she had been hiding every day. Every demon she met along the way could have killed or violated her. But here, she felt a sense of security. "All right, lunch is over. I'm going to prepare for the lunch service." Meg stood up and prepared to clear the dishes. "This is my job." Jane stood up immediately and took Meg's bowl and chopsticks. Then, she quickly stacked the bowls together and swept all the crayfish shells on the table into the trash can. "All right." Meg looked at the clean and nimble Jane and retracted his hand. It seemed like she was more suited to this job than he had expected. With Jane clearing the table, Meg went into the kitchen and carried a big pot out of the dining room. He set it up in the empty space in the courtyard. As a new restaurant, the easiest and most effective way to attract customers was to grab the attention of the customers first. Although IE Crayfish Restaurant wasn't opened in the most prosperous area of Carapace Island, it was close to the main street, so many demons still passed by. Seeing this new house, many demons cast their attention over. However, when they saw the protective amulet hanging on the door, they withdrew their gazes in boredom. With the protective amulet of the 10 Kings Palace, it would not be easy to attack. "Uncle Hades, are you going to start making crayfish?" Justin, who was leaning against the railing next door, was already waiting anxiously. When he saw Meg coming out, his eyes immediately lit up. "Yes, we officially open for business at noon today." Meg nodded with a smile. It seemed like this little rock demon was completely mesmerized by the crayfish's deliciousness. "Father, Mother, come out quickly. Uncle Hades next door is already open for business. Let's have crayfish for lunch today," Justin shouted into the house. Meg turned around with a smile and started to process the crayfish. He was only going to release spicy crayfish for lunch today, as a stable customer base had yet to form. It would be too troublesome to cook too little, and he wouldn't be able to ensure the best time to eat the crayfish if he cooked too much. Therefore, he could only choose a crayfish that was tasty and impactful. When the crayfish was scooped up from the pond, the sand on its surface was removed instantly by the rapid water jet. Unlike the crayfish that were reared in the ditches and paddies, the crayfish that were reared in the system were already considered seafood. Therefore, they didn't need to be washed too much. The crayfish that were baring its fangs and brandishing its claws were also stunned by the water jet. At this moment, the knife flashed, and the perfect back opening was completed. He flicked his finger on the crayfish's tail, and the veins were removed successfully. Then, he threw the crayfish into a big basin at the side. The entire process didn't take more than 3 seconds. This is an expert. Justin, who was leaning on the railing, was dumbfounded. The kitchen knife was so fast that his eyes couldn't follow it. Before the big crayfish could struggle, its back was cut open, and it was thrown into the basin. Dong, 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 a big basin was filled with the processed crayfish. "Mother, I want to learn this," Justin said as he pointed at Meg when he saw Gamina walk out of the door. "You want to learn everything all day long." Gamina raised her hand and gave him a slap. "It's a good thing that the child wants to learn. We have to give him a chance to choose his future." Ivan followed her out of the door. "You want to challenge me?" Gamina turned to look at him. Ivan swayed left and right, avoiding her gaze, and hummed a few lines. "Chance, chicken, you're too beautiful, then, I want to eat crayfish," Justin said aggrievedly as he held his head. "Let's go. As neighbors, of course, we should take care of the business. We're the first wave of customers." Gamina took the lead and walked out of the courtyard. "All right." Justin's face lit up, and he quickly caught up with him. "Welcome, neighbors." Meg smiled as he looked at the rock troll family of 3. As expected, the grilled crayfish he made yesterday had the effect of attracting the first batch of customers to the restaurant. "The restaurant looks great. Are the tables and chairs custom-made?" Gamina looked around, and her gaze landed on the black stone table and chairs. Carapace Island didn't seem to produce this kind of stone. It was simple and elegant. "They're just ordinary stones." Meg let the family of 3 sit down with a smile, and then asked, "Do you want to order some crayfish?" Justin nodded hurriedly. He hadn't eaten in the morning, and purposely saved his stomach for crayfish for lunch. "Do you have a menu?" "We want to look at the menu first," Gamina asked, not in a hurry to nod. "The restaurant can only provide spicy crayfish and beer at the moment." Meg flipped the number plate on the table, and the menu was on the back. Spicy crayfish, 100 copper coins each. Beer iced, 50 copper coins each. Gamina looked at the menu that only had 2 choices, and was slightly shocked. The crayfish were sold in batches, and the price was 100 copper coins each. That so-called beer was also 50 copper coins each. This price was far higher than that of ordinary restaurants on Carapace Island. If their family of 3 went to a small restaurant outside for a meal, they would only need 100 copper coins to fill their stomachs. Moreover, it was a table full of crabs, fish, and prawns. Ivan was also surprised. Although the 2 of them could earn 10,000 copper coins a month from their work in the fishing ground pulling nets, they had never eaten crayfish that cost 100 copper coins and beer that cost 50 copper coins each. Gamina retracted her gaze from the menu, and said to Meg, "We'll have 3 spicy crayfish." "All right, please wait for a moment. I still need to get some tools," Meg replied with a smile, and turned to walk into the restaurant. Jane, who was standing at the side and didn't get a chance to interrupt, also quickly followed Meg into the restaurant to see if there was anything she needed help with. Why is it so expensive? Although the crayfish he makes is indeed delicious, if it's 100 copper coins. I'm afraid not many demons would be willing to eat it, Ivan said softly to Gamina, but he had already secretly swallowed his saliva countless times. If Justin's shell change was really caused by this crayfish, then even 10,000 copper coins each would be considered cheap, Gamina said calmly. Honey, you're really not careless when it comes to important matters. Ivan gave him a thumbs up with a look of reverence, and then moved forward with a bashful smile. I haven't changed my shell in a long time. If I can change my shell again, I'll be a level 4 demon, and our family status will be able to go up a little. If it's effective, then let Justin eat a few more. He's more talented than you. Gamina glanced at Ivan. Mother, I love you. Justin hugged Gamina with a blissful expression, and then made a face at Ivan proudly. How lonely. Ivan sighed desolately. What else could he do? He only ate a pincer yesterday, and he was already captured. Chapter 13:29. Boss, is that crayfish really 100 copper coins per crayfish? Jane asked in disbelief as she followed behind Meg with a condiment box in her hands. She had just eaten a crayfish that cost 100 copper coins. You also think it's too cheap, right? Meg turned around to look at Jane and pondered seriously. If the regular customers of Mamie's knew about this price, they would probably be moved to tears. The cost of a crayfish was 50 copper coins, and the cost of the ingredients was 10 copper coins. This was not including the cooking fee for a chef at the god of cookery level like him. He only earned 40 copper coins per crayfish. Compared to the price he used to charge 4 to 5 times the price of the ingredients, this price couldn't be more reasonable. Could it be that he had found his conscience? No, he just wanted to complete the mission as soon as possible. The crayfish that was priced at 500 copper coins would win based on taste, and Meg wouldn't worry about starving to death. However, this kind of crayfish was destined to be a delicacy for a minority of people, and most of the customers would be rejected. Mamie's was positioned as a high-class restaurant, and its high price meant that its customers were destined to be a minority. It wasn't discrimination, but this was the price of food with top-notch ingredients and top-notch culinary skills. Moreover, it was discounted. However, Meg planned to make IE Crayfish Restaurant into a cheap food stall. 100 copper coins wasn't cheap for most of the demons on Carapace Island, but it was 1 kilogram in size. Ordinary demons could also eat one if they clenched their teeth. Therefore, it would have a large base of customers. Meg didn't come to Carapace Island to earn money. The most important thing was to complete the system's mission of capturing 300,000 crayfish. And his plan was to eat them. With Carapace Island as the center, he would radiate to the entire Demon Islands and use the delicious crayfish to cultivate a group of crayfish-loving diners. As long as this hobby was cultivated, these demons would become the #1 natural enemy of the crayfish. Why is it that in my Great China, as long as it's something edible, there's no way to cause a large-scale species invasion? The answer was simple: they didn't have time to develop. Crayfish was an example of an invasive species back then. It was eaten until it became a rare species in Greater China. If it were not for the development of various breeding methods, it would probably have gone extinct. This was a proven example of success. Meg was not too confident about the completion of the mission of catching 100 breeding crayfish in the vast ocean. However, as long as he could solve the problem of species invasion and overflow, and create a batch of irresistible natural enemies for the crayfish, this mission would not be too different from completion. The discount promotion was one of Meg's plans to popularize crayfish on a large scale. Only cheap and good crayfish could quickly become the leader of Carapace Island's supper scene. Is it cheap? Jane was a little speechless. To her, 100 copper coins was a lot of money. She usually picked up shells at the seaside for a whole day, and could only sell them for 10 copper coins. This prawn cost her the money of picking up shells at the seaside for 10 days. It was too expensive. However, this crayfish was really delicious. Now that he thought about it, it still felt like a dream. Perhaps it was because it was delicious that it was so expensive. If it was somewhere else, they would go crazy. Meg nodded emotionally. He pushed open the door and walked out. After putting down the wooden rack, he arranged all the spices and condiments on the wooden rack one by one. He put on an apron and buttoned up his sleeves. Meg's gaze became cold and sharp. Jane stood at the side and looked at Meg, who was standing in front of the pot, in surprise. She felt that he seemed to have changed into a different person at this moment. He lit the fire, held a towel with one hand, and grabbed the 2-meter-wide iron pot to rotate on the stove to heat up the bottom of the pot evenly. He poured the oil into the pot and heated it until it was 70% hot. Then, he poured in the ginger and garlic that he had prepared earlier and stir-fried them. He sprinkled in a bunch of dried chili, pepper, and other spices. The fragrance of the spices wafted out immediately. The family of 3 rock trolls and Jane couldn't help but stretch their heads out to look curiously. Why do you have to be so exaggerated when you're making a dish? Why do you need such a big pot for 3 crayfish? What are those weird things? Although this smell is fragrant, it's also spicy. Gamina frowned. She couldn't recognize any of them anyway. However, the fragrance after stir-frying the spices made her even more curious. After stir-frying the spices, Meg picked up the crayfish that he had prepared earlier, and poured the whole pot into the iron pot. He turned on the fire, held the big spatula in one hand, and grabbed the handle of the pot with the other, stir-frying the crayfish. The blackish-green crayfish gradually turned red, and the fragrance of the crayfish started to ferment together with the fragrance of the spices. Then, it spread in all directions. It smells so good. Justin swallowed his saliva as he looked at the bright red crayfish in the pot. He couldn't wait to have one. This fragrance is completely different from the grilled crayfish yesterday, but why is it still so tempting? It's an irresistible smell. Gamina looked at the crayfish that were being stir-fried in the big pot that Meg was playing with. Although she didn't want to admit it, this spicy fragrance was indeed very tempting. "Ah, I'm dead." Ivan rested his head on the table, and stared at the crayfish in the pot with his eyes wide open. He only ate 1 pincer yesterday. No matter what, he had to eat a whole crayfish today. The fragrance of the stir-fried spicy crayfish rose from the courtyard, and then gradually drifted out of the courtyard to the road. It smells so good. What's this smell? It seems to be coming from there. In just a short while, there were already over a dozen demons standing outside the courtyard. They all stared curiously at Meg, who was stir-frying the crayfish in the pot. The source of the fragrance was them, and they unknowingly swallowed their saliva. "This looks like a restaurant." A Minotaur demon looked up at the signboard. This was the first time he had heard of a crayfish restaurant, but this fragrance was really too tempting. "I didn't see it when I passed by last time. Seems like it's newly opened. It's a pity that there's a protective amulet hanging there." A demon with 2 leopard heads glanced coldly at the large protective amulet hanging at a conspicuous spot on the door. "This cooking method is so special. It's the first time I've seen it. It smells good, but I don't know how it tastes." A succubus with an enchanting figure looked at Meg with a smile. "Moreover, this chef looks quite delicate." "Is that so? But he doesn't live as well as Big Brother." A tall demon stuck close to her from behind, and a pair of big hands already reached out to her waist mischievously. "Is that so? That succubus turned around and smiled seductively at him. A glimmer of light flashed in her green and blue eyes. That demon was obviously stunned for a moment, and the movements of his hands also stopped. At this moment, that succubus suddenly lifted her leg and kicked his crotch. Accompanied by the sound of eggs breaking, that tall demon flew backward and crashed onto the street more than 10 meters away. He covered his crotch and cried out in pain. "You didn't pay, and you want to touch me? You're courting death." That succubus retracted her leg and glanced at the demon standing beside her. The male demons subconsciously retracted their legs, and the demons who originally wanted to take advantage of her all took a few steps to the side. This was a ruthless character. Chapter 1330. Meg also noticed the commotion outside. He took some time to look up, but his gaze couldn't help but linger on the succubus for a while. That was a beautiful succubus. He couldn't tell her age. She could be said to be in her early 20s, but the charm between her eyebrows was so natural that only a young woman in her 30s could have it. Her figure was enchanting, and she was wearing short black leather pants. She had a head of sexy red curly hair, and her slender phoenix eyes made her seductive face even more charming. All the advantages of a succubus were concentrated on her. This was a woman that men couldn't take their eyes off once they saw her. She also happened to look at Meg. Their gazes met. It was a pair of blue eyes. The mysterious and charming eyes suddenly spun like a whirlpool, trying to drag him into a mysterious place. However, Meg retracted his gaze the moment their gazes met. He secretly sighed in his heart, and lowered his head to continue stir-frying the crayfish. What a joke. It was fine that he fell for the mysterious stone statue, but if even a succubus could charm him so easily, he would be too weak. However, this succubus had at least the strength of a level 8 demon. As a low-level demon race, the strength of this succubus surprised him. Angela exclaimed in surprise. This guy actually got rid of her eyes of enchantment. Is he an expert? Or is he an unromantic little virgin? Angela looked at Meg with some interest. After the shell of the crayfish turned completely red, Meg sprinkled a handful of sea salt, stir-fried it a few times, and poured in beer to cover the crayfish. He took the pot lid standing at the side, and covered the iron pot with it. The spicy aroma immediately disappeared. "Uncle Hades, is the crayfish ready?" Justin asked impatiently. "No, this is just the beginning." Meg shook his head with a smile. The step of braising the crayfish with beer was very important. It was equivalent to injecting a soul into the crayfish. It couldn't be rushed, and it was unavoidable. Putting down the spatula, Meg looked up at the demons who were watching the commotion outside, and said with a smile, "Everyone, aren't you coming in to try the spicy crayfish that is about to come out of the oven?" The restaurant owner issued an invitation, and all the demons showed some hesitation on their faces. Although the aroma that they had smelled just now was quite tempting, they didn't know how this so-called crayfish tasted. "Sure, I happen to be hungry." Angela walked in through the door and stared at Meg. She activated Eyes of Charm on Meg again. "Please sit." Meg looked at her calmly and smiled. Women were probably the least tempting thing to him. Could there be a woman more beautiful than Irina in this world? Was there a woman who could beat her? No. What else was there to say? He couldn't beat him either. It really didn't work. Angela was stunned for a moment. She was sure that Meg didn't avoid her gaze. He had completely received her eyes of enchantment. Then, there was only one possibility left. What a pity. He can't do it at such a young age. Angela looked at Meg with pity and found a seat to sit down. Meg felt that this succubus's gaze was full of meaning, but he couldn't ask directly, so he could only pretend not to know. "Excuse me. Excuse me, what would you like to eat? Jane went forward and looked at Angela nervously. This was the first time she spoke to a stranger like this. Crayfish. I'll eat what he's making now. Angela pointed at the big pot with a lid in front of Meg. If it wasn't for the tempting aroma, she wouldn't waste time eating here. This is spicy crayfish. Please take a look at the price. Jane quickly turned the table number on the table and showed her the menu. Spicy crayfish, 100 copper coins for one. Angela read out loud, thought for a while, and said, then give me 2, and a glass of this beer. Oh. Okay. Jane quickly nodded and looked at Meg. I heard that. Meg nodded with a smile. The little girl still needed to continue training, but it was normal for her to be a little nervous since it was her first time receiving customers. So expensive. Aren't these crayfish sold by the caddy? Why are they sold by the caddy? Such a big crayfish, 1 caddy already. It's not too expensive. It's still acceptable. The demons standing outside were surprised when they heard that. Some demons thought it was expensive and turned to leave. Some demons thought the price was reasonable, but they didn't rush in. They wanted to see how the people who had already ordered tasted. If someone helped them clear the mines, they wouldn't waste 100 copper coins. After the fire boiled, Meg waited for about 3 minutes before opening the lid and collecting the juice. The spicy aroma rose along with the steam and once again wreaked havoc in the air. There was also a faint aroma of wine in the air, which made it even more intoxicating. A few demons left because of the price, but the spicy aroma attracted more demons. They all swallowed their saliva outside the yard. What a shocking aroma! Angela's eyes lit up when she saw the boiling red soup in the big pot. She looked at Meg with a different gaze. Although this man couldn't cook, he was still very good at cooking. She didn't expect there to be such a demon on Carapace Island who could cook. Should she capture him and bring him back? It smells like spicy grilled fish. It's completely different from the one we had at noon. At this moment, Amy ran out of the restaurant. Her little nose twitched, and she took a deep sniff. She looked at Meg in surprise, and said, Father, is this a new crayfish flavor? So cute. Angela looked at Amy. The little girl looked like she was carved from jade. Her red clothes made her look like a cooked crayfish shell. She even had a pair of pincers on her head. She looked so cute that she couldn't help but want to touch those pincers. It's a little spicy. Irina followed them out of the door. She frowned slightly when she smelled the spicy aroma. She still preferred the garlic crayfish. That smell was milder. Why don't you go inside and rest for a while? There's a lot of smoke outside, Meg said gently to Irina. After all, they were relying on the aroma to attract customers. "Es so beautiful." Angela looked at Irina, and her eyes lit up instantly. This female demon was wearing a simple black dress. She had an exquisite and beautiful face, long and slender legs, and a distinct collarbone. However, she had breasts that were comparable to her own. More importantly, her aura was like that of a god, noble and elegant. She was completely different from ordinary demons. Oh no, it's the feeling of falling in love. Angela pressed her chest. Then, she suddenly looked at Meg and stared at him. This guy actually married this beauty. And that adorable child is theirs. No, this can't be true. He clearly can't. Chapter 1331. It's all right. I'm here to collect money. Irina shook her head. She glanced at Angela, and a hint of surprise flashed across her eyes as well. She was actually an 8th-tier succubus. Although she had tried her best to hide her abilities, it was still exposed under the huge difference in their abilities. Angela tried her best to smile innocently when she saw Irina looking at her. To a succubus, especially a rare genius like her, a casual smile could charm those male creatures. However, Irina had already ignored her before her smile fully bloomed. She turned her attention back to Meg, and watched him cook with interest. This is really a lucky toad, to actually be able to eat such a beautiful swan. Angela looked at Meg angrily. She made up her mind that she would definitely save this sister of hers after this mission was completed. The red crayfish's surface glowed with red oil, and the large red chili peppers made one's throat heat up. "Bring it to the guests," Meg said to Jane as he placed the crayfish one by one on a large plate of paper, and placed it on a tray. Jane picked up the tray carefully, and then placed the 3 plates of crayfish in front of the rock troll family of 3 and Angela. "Your spicy crayfish. Please enjoy." Then, she filled a large stone cup with beer, and placed it gently in front of Angela. "Your beer. Wow, these crayfish are great." Justin, who had been waiting anxiously for a long time, swallowed his saliva as he looked at the big crayfish in front of him. He couldn't wait to grab a pincer and stuff it into his mouth. The freshly cooked crayfish was still steaming hot, but the rock troll's hard stone shell allowed them to ignore such a temperature. "So spicy." Justin put the pincer into his mouth, and his grayish-white face turned green and red immediately. White steam even rose from his head. The spicy soup on the surface of the pincer seemed to have broken through a scoop of hot water on his taste buds. His tongue was instantly numbed, and the spiciness spread through his tongue. His body quickly heated up. "What's wrong?" Gamina hurriedly asked. "Gotcha, gotcha, gotcha." Justin had already chewed open the prawn shell. The plump prawn meat in the pincers, together with the spicy texture, finally blossomed into a wonderful taste in his mouth. The spicy taste was especially refreshing. The more he chewed, the more fragrant it was. He said vaguely, "It's spicy, but it's delicious." Gamina was relieved to see that Justin had finished one pincer, and was starting to break off the prawn's head. She reached out to break off the prawn's head as well. On the other side, Ivan had already pried open the crayfish's shell impatiently, and took out the plump crayfish meat from the shell. Looking at the red gravy at the bottom of the plate, he pondered for a while, and dipped the crayfish meat in the gravy before putting it into his mouth to take a bite. Oh my God! The spicy broth and the plump lobster meat combined perfectly. The spicy taste stimulated the taste buds and soared into the sky, almost lifting the top of the head. Then came the tender and delicious lobster meat. The spicy broth had perfectly seeped into the lobster meat, and the various spices gave it a mesmerizing taste. While chewing, one could feel the wonderful chewiness of the teeth colliding with the meat. Spicy and delicious, Ivan didn't know what words he should use to describe this wonderful taste. The feeling of eating the meat alone without the shell was indeed more wonderful than eating them together. He could perfectly experience the wonderful texture of the crayfish meat. The crayfish meat dipped in the gravy made the spicy taste even more intense. Although the tip of his tongue was almost numb, his mouth still couldn't stop. The plump crayfish meat entered his stomach almost in the blink of an eye. After sucking on his gravy-stained fingers, Ivan picked up the remaining crayfish shell and head. He chewed on the crayfish shell. Compared to the crispness of the grilled crayfish last night, the crayfish shell dipped in the spicy broth had a slightly harder texture. However, it still had a different taste. The family of 3 rock trolls ate heartily, and let out a few exclamations and praises from time to time. The customers outside couldn't stand it any longer. 3 or 4 customers had already entered, and found a seat to sit down. They also ordered a crayfish. On the other side, Angela's attention was completely attracted by the crayfish in front of her. This bright red crayfish was even bigger than her face. It was cut open from the head to the tail, revealing the plump meat inside. The spicy fragrance wafted over along with the heat. She heard that humans liked to cook with all kinds of spices, but demons were not as pretentious and particular as humans when it came to eating. They were generally more rough. "It's quite fragrant, but I don't know how it tastes," Angela muttered. Seeing that there were no other tools she could use, she could only use her hands. She first broke off a pincer and unscrewed the shell with her bare hands, revealing the tender meat inside. "It doesn't look any different from ordinary cooking." Angela was a little disappointed. She stirred the crayfish meat in the gravy and put it into her mouth. "Oh!" Angela's expression immediately changed as soon as she put the crayfish meat into her mouth. The unexpected spiciness exploded on the tip of her tongue, as though a firebomb had exploded in her mouth. The burning sensation instantly exploded. Rip! There was a crisp sound. There was already a hole in her black blouse, and it was almost unable to stop the waves. The demons could not help but take a few more glances. Unfortunately, they seemed to be blocked by some kind of holy light, and there was no way to appreciate the beautiful scene of her blouse exploding. Angela had no time to care at this time because after the spiciness, the plump crayfish meat had already appeared on the stage. It was like a spring breeze calming down a huge wave, and then plunged into the deep water. The spicy taste and fresh crayfish meat, under the contrast of all kinds of spices, blossomed with a breathtaking deliciousness. Living on the island all year round, seafood was just the most common food. But this mouthful of crayfish meat overturned all her understanding of seafood in the past 20 years. "This is too delicious." Angela's heart was screaming, and she catered to this suffocating deliciousness without holding back. In this world, there were really people who could make the same food unbelievably delicious. Angela opened her eyes and looked at Meg, who was loading the plate. That man was obviously such an existence. She then looked at Irina, who was standing at the side. She seemed to have some ideas. This toad could eat swan meat. This amazing culinary skill must have played a crucial role. But he really can't. Angela was still a little unwilling. She stared at Meg while eating crayfish in big mouthfuls. After eating a pincer, although it was delicious, the burning sensation in her mouth and throat made her a little uncomfortable. Her gaze fell on the glass of beer on the table. Although it was bubbling strangely, she still reached out to grab the glass and drank a big mouthful. Chapter 1332. Pfft. The cool and refreshing beer instantly extinguished the burning spiciness. The soft and delicate taste had a hint of bitterness, which was weak yet slightly pleasant. This beer is so special, and it's a perfect match with this spicy crayfish. Angela's eyes lit up. The fragrance of the beer was like a flower, elegant but not pungent. The delicate bubbles burst, making a soft sound. Eating a mouthful of spicy crayfish and drinking a big mouthful of cold beer made Angela's expression gradually brighten up. It turned out that delicious food could really make eating a wonderful thing. The rock troll family ate heartily, and Angela ate freely. The demons that gradually gathered could not resist the temptation of the delicacies. More and more demons entered the courtyard, and it was soon full. Jane walked among the customers. Although everyone ordered a crayfish first, she was still afraid that she would remember the order wrongly. Of course, what surprised her the most was that the restaurant had attracted so many customers when it had just opened. This was completely beyond her expectations and imagination. Meg served the crayfish to the customers, and prepared the second pot of spicy crayfish at the same time. The enthusiasm of the customers was indeed beyond his expectations. The opening was smoother than he had expected. The spicy and fresh spicy crayfish brought him the first batch of customers with its aroma. As the courtyard was filled up, more and more passers-by were attracted and became potential customers. The 3 crayfish, meat and shell included, went into the stomachs of Ivan's family of 3. Ivan picked up the crayfish bowl and drank a mouthful of the spicy soup, letting the spicy taste wreak havoc in his mouth. He put down the bowl, wiped his sweat, and looked at Gamina longingly. "Honey, why don't we order another one?" Yes, I'm not full yet," Justin hurriedly agreed. Gamina was a little hesitant. After all, it was a crayfish that cost 100 copper coins each. They obviously could not eat it every day. "Hey! Look, isn't my hand starting to mold?" Ivan suddenly raised his hand, and thin white cracks appeared on the grayish-white stone shell as if it was about to shatter. "Is this the 4th time it's going to change its shell?" Gamina grabbed Ivan's hand with a look of surprise on her face. "I didn't have any when I woke up this morning." Ivan couldn't hide his excitement. After thinking for a while, he pointed at the empty bowl in front of him, and said, "It must be because of this crayfish." After eating the crayfish, the cracks appeared. "I think I can change my shell a 2nd time if I eat a few more crayfish," Justin added. Gamina pondered for a while. When she ate the crayfish just now, she also felt hot all over. Her shell felt itchy, as though something was trying to crawl out of her body. Yesterday, Justin had just changed his shell after eating a crayfish. Today, Ivan was about to change his shell after eating a crayfish. It seemed like the crayfish had a very powerful effect on the shell-changing of rock trolls. "Let's have 3 more crayfish," Gamina and Jane said. "All right, please wait a moment." Jane nodded. Meg was making the 2nd pot of spicy crayfish. "Give me another crayfish, and then a glass of cold beer." Angela also raised her hand at the side. Only then did she realize that her collar was open. She fastened it unhurriedly, and looked up at Meg with a different gaze. "This fellow's culinary skills are really mesmerizing. If we can catch him and bring him back to the island, then we'll be in for a treat in the future." Angela's lips curled up slightly, and then she looked at Irina and Amy. "It'll be even better if we can bring these sisters along." The spicy crayfish attacked the taste buds of the island's native demons. Coupled with the heat wave of more than 30 degrees Celsius, the demons were tormented back and forth between deliciousness and spiciness. And at this time, a glass of cold beer was the savior of everything. The demons surrounded the square table, peeled the crayfish shells, ate the crayfish meat, and took a big gulp of beer. This combination was better than anything else. "Honey, you settle the bill first. I have to go home and change my shell." Ivan got up and walked out quickly. Mud shells were already falling off his body, and cracks of various sizes were all over his body. It was as though he would shatter at the next moment. Gamina got up and looked at the small cracks that were starting to appear on her body. She took out 6 gold coins and handed them to Irina with a smile, and praised, "Mr. Hades' culinary skills are really amazing and impressive." "He'll be proud if you praise him like this," Irina said with a smile as she accepted the gold coins. Gamina dragged Justin, who still wanted another crayfish, away. 100 copper coins for a crayfish and 50 copper coins for a glass of beer were not cheap. However, the demons who had eaten them were all impressed by the wonderful taste, so most of them were quite cooperative when they paid. 5 crayfish and 10 glasses of beer. That's a total of 10 gold coins. Irina reached out her hand to a 2-faced demon who was already a little drunk. 10 gold coins. That 2-faced demon with 2 ugly faces stood up shakily. He looked at Irina with a sinister gaze, and said with a sinister smile, "Chick, did you see what I ate? There's nothing on this table. What right do you have to say that I ate those things? I said I didn't eat anything. What can you do?" The demons who were eating all turned their heads to look. Many of them looked like they were watching a show. If it was possible, they wouldn't mind using the same method to get a free meal. Anyway, that guy with a pair of pincers on his head didn't look like a demon who could fight. However, his wife was really so beautiful that it made people envious. Amy walked up and looked at that two-faced demon seriously, and said, "Eat and pay. Otherwise, I'll beat all of you to death." "Ha, little imp, get lost." The two-faced demon looked at Amy with disdain, and then looked at Irina with a sinister gaze, and said, "You want money? Sure, let me have some fun, and I'll give you the money." As he said that, a pair of hands full of blood bags attacked Irina's chest. Oh no! Jane was shocked. She rushed forward with the tray in her hand. This is a good opportunity. Angela, who had just finished eating, was wiping her mouth when her eyes lit up. The opportunity to be a hero and save the beauty had appeared. In this courtyard, no one except her could save the beauty at such a critical moment. She couldn't count on the man who was lowering his head to cook crayfish and pretending not to see this scene. "Idiot!" Irina said coldly. A stool suddenly appeared in her hand, and she slammed it on the two-faced demon's head. The head with the black and white faces spun more than a dozen times like a top. Its short and thick neck was twisted into a long fried dough twist, and it spiraled into the air with its fat body. Explode reality, shatter spirit, and banish this idiot who doesn't pay for his meal. Amy raised her hand and threw out a ball of fire. Boom! The two-faced demon that spiraled into the air exploded into a beautiful firework, and there wasn't even a trace of him left. "Why do you have to do that?" Mag sighed. "What a courageous fellow." Chapter 1333. Silence ensued in the restaurant. All of the demons looked on at the gradually dissipating smoke, and only after a long while did they slowly close their mouths. Their eyes were filled with horror and incredulity as they looked at Irina and Amy. A fifth-tier two-faced demon. He was actually killed by a stool just like that, and he died so thoroughly that not even a trace of him was left. Who would have thought that such a beautiful female demon and a cute little demon would have such powerful strength and a good mentality to kill demons without batting an eyelid? Gulp. The Minotaur demon sitting at the same table as the two-faced demon swallowed his saliva and slowly lowered his head. He was suddenly glad that he didn't join in the commotion just now. Otherwise, there would be two fireworks blooming in the sky right now. The demons who were careless before all looked away and began to calculate whether the money in their pockets was enough to pay for this crayfish meal. So powerful. Jane looked at Irina and Amy in shock and stopped in her tracks. That demon who was incomparably powerful in her eyes was actually slapped into a star by the lady boss and little boss. It was really unbelievable. She suddenly realized that Irina had said in the morning, "Trouble. It doesn't exist." It was just a very ordinary explanation. Angela, who was ready to save the damsel in distress, looked at Irina in a daze as she slowly retracted her folding chair. Her mouth was slightly open, and little stars were already in her eyes. Vulgar but forthright words, unhesitant actions, and flawless coordination. Do you have to be so cool? Angela clenched her fists, and her gaze gradually became firm. I'm going to marry this damn woman sooner or later. Bill? Irina turned around and stared at Angela. Oh, yes. Angela blushed and nodded quickly. She took out 3 gold coins and handed them to Irina. Very good. Irina, who had successfully received the money, finally showed a smile on her face. The crayfish was delicious. I'll come again. Angela reached out to stroke her hair and smiled charmingly at Irina. Missy, your rabbit ran out, Amy reminded her. All the demons looked up. Ah! It's so dazzling. A dazzling light made them close their eyes subconsciously. Ah! Angela looked down and quickly reached out to grab the collar that was not fastened tightly just now. "This rabbit is growing quite well," Irina commented seriously. Angela blushed. Shouldn't she be the one to do such things normally? Why was it the other way around? She turned around and ran away. The two-faced demon that exploded into fireworks became the loudest opening salute of the crayfish restaurant. At the same time, it also made the demons who had other thoughts start to focus on the delicious crayfish in front of them, becoming purer. "Here's my money. For crayfish, 2 cups of beer, 5 gold coins. Here's mine. 2 crayfish, 6 mugs of beer. 5 gold coins." Irina stood at the door. The customers who had finished eating came forward to pay respectfully with their gold coins in their hands. They even reported what they had eaten, and were much more polite to Jane now. Meg looked at this scene, and suddenly felt like he was still in Chaos City. One had to know that this was Carapace Island, the most chaotic island in the Demon Islands. On Carapace Island, peace and order would not be respected, and one would not be able to receive money. Instead, one would easily become the target of bullying. Hence, Meg did not restrict Irina from doing anything. As long as she did not expose her identity, she could do whatever she wanted. Even if she flipped the entire Carapace Island over, he would only help to light the fire. After showing his muscles, he could avoid a lot of trouble. At least, he would not have to deal with those small fries who came looking for trouble every day. Meg ended his business at around 1:30 p.m. The feeling of collecting money is indeed great. Irina shook the little wooden box that she used to store money, and it made a mesmerizing sound. Then, she regretfully said, "However, it's not as fast as collecting protection fees back then. Why don't we go back to our old business?" Irina looked up at Meg with an eager expression. "Don't you know that the limelight has been very tight recently? Getting rid of evil is not a joke." "We can't do something like that," Meg said with a serious shake of his head. "What does it matter? Let's do evil against evil. Those fellows from Ten Kings Palace should have gotten fatter after being fed for a few years. We can cut them off and feed them for a few more years before we continue to cut them off," Irina said with a chuckle. "Do you think they are fat sheep?" Meg rolled his eyes as he observed a moment of silence for Ten Kings Palace in his heart. "That's a rather apt description. We should at least wait until we are about to leave. If we do it now, it won't be good for us to continue doing business in their territory." Meg shook his head. It was too cruel to roast mutton on someone else's grass after cutting their wool. "All right, let's keep them for a few more days." Irina nodded as she carried the box and turned to walk into the restaurant. Jane was stunned as she listened at the side. Although she didn't quite understand what the boss and lady boss were talking about, her instincts told her that it was definitely something important. After all, she had heard about Ten Kings Palace. "Jane, you did very well this afternoon." Meg looked at Jane and smiled. The little girl looked skinny, but just as she said, she was extremely resilient. She didn't look too tired after running back and forth for over 100 times. She could completely keep up with the intensity of her work. Jane blushed. This was the first time she had heard someone other than her mother praise her. She lowered her eyes and quickly cleaned up the table. "Put the bowls and chopsticks in the sink. I will wash them in a while. You just have to be responsible for wiping the tables and chairs clean," Meg continued. "Boss, you have been busy for the entire afternoon. Take a rest first. I will finish the rest of the work." Jane hurriedly looked up at Meg. In her opinion, the boss had created such delicious food. His work was sacred and great, while what she was doing was the simplest thing. "Then your workload will exceed the limit. I will feel guilty." Meg smiled as he took the tray from Jane and walked into the restaurant. "Boss, Jane looked at Meg's back view with reddened eyes. Meg placed all the bowls in the large sink and pressed the button to wash them. The dishwasher started working automatically. After washing the bowls, it would disinfect them automatically and place them in the cupboard. It was easy, clean, and fast. He had sold 210 crayfish at noon, which was completely beyond his expectations. It could be considered a perfect start. If nothing went wrong, the first batch of customers at noon would come again at night. Moreover, they might bring more customers. From experience, a virtuous cycle had begun. "B-boss, the people from Ten Kings Palace are here," Jane said with a pale face as she ran in hurriedly. Chapter 1334. So fast. Meg was a little surprised. He took off his apron and hung it on a chair at the side. He gently patted Jane's shoulders and comforted her gently. "Jane, don't be afraid. They are not here for you. Just stay in the restaurant and don't come out." "But..." Jane looked at Meg. She was worried that the Ten Kings Palace had come because of her. "We said we would protect you," Meg said with a smile. He let go of her and walked out of the restaurant. In the courtyard, a fat abyss demon was using a stone chair to wipe the mud off his shoes. Another spatial demon was using a spatula to knock on a metal pot, making clanging sounds. "May I know what the two of you are here for?" Meg glanced at the spatula in the spatial demon's hand and frowned. However, he was not in a hurry to act. "You are the boss here." The spatial demon looked up at Meg and frowned. "What race is this demon from? Why haven't I seen him before? Are there demons like the lobster race?" "Yes." Meg nodded. The fat abyss demon at the side took his feet off the chair and strode forward. He pointed his nose at Meg and said arrogantly, "I heard you killed a demon with a protective amulet. Are you not going to obey the rules of the Ten Kings Palace? A two-faced demon who caused trouble." Meg nodded. Then, he pointed at the large protective amulet hanging on the door, and calmly said, "If I remember correctly, according to the Ten Kings Palace's rules, the demons who hang the shop's protective amulet have the right to kill any demons who create trouble in the shop, right?" "You..." The abyss demon choked. He had planned to suppress this fellow first before squeezing some benefits out of him. He did not expect this fellow to use the rules of the Ten Kings Palace to suppress him. "Ha, you said he caused trouble. Do you have any evidence?" "I heard he did not even leave a single scrap behind." The spatial demon came forward with a spatula and sneered at Meg. "If he didn't cause any trouble, why would I, a restaurant owner, make things difficult for a customer? If I wasn't happy, would I kill a customer as a sacrifice to the heavens? Or do you think there are too many customers and you want to scare some away?" Meg looked at the spatial demon as if he was looking at an idiot. "You..." The spatial demon choked. What made him even angrier was that this fellow's eyes were filled with undisguised mockery. Meg sighed and said with a disappointed expression, "When I first came to Carapace Island, I heard that the Ten Kings Palace had managed the entire island well. That's why I came here to open a restaurant. If I still can't guarantee that I can open a restaurant on Carapace Island after buying the highest grade protective amulet, then I can only go to the Ten Kings Palace to ask for an explanation." This guy. The spatial demon and the abyssal demon were both enraged. They were merely the lowest members of the Ten Kings Palace. They could do whatever they wanted on Carapace Island just because they were from one of the top 10 tribes and the Ten Kings Palace's name. No one had ever dared to go against them, let alone do something so disrespectful. However, the protective amulets had brought a lot of income to the top 10 tribes over the years. Therefore, the top 10 tribes had also consciously regulated the use of the protective amulets. This way, more demons would take the initiative to buy protective amulets. If this matter reached the headquarters, they wouldn't be able to do anything to Meg. Instead, it would be troublesome. I'm warning you. You better behave yourself on Carapace Island. Otherwise, I won't let you have an easy time, the spatial demon warned as he pointed his spatula at Meg. I've always been a stickler for rules. Meg smiled as he grabbed the spatula's handle and pulled it back from the spatial demon's hand. Looking at this spatial demon, he really couldn't get angry at all. After all, he had killed his ancestor in his first battle. The spatial demon tribe's current unstable status was all thanks to him. Looking at this little fellow, he actually felt a little pitiful. As for that abyssal demon, he would probably be rushing back to attend his chief's funeral in another 2 days. He wondered if he would still be able to look down on others like he was doing now. The spatial demon and the abyssal demon were rebuffed. They couldn't find any fault with him, so they could only leave angrily. Meg looked at the backs of the 2 demons as they left, and murmured to himself thoughtfully, seems like I really have to take advantage of them. Boss is so impressive. Jane, who was hiding in the restaurant and secretly watching this scene, looked at Meg with admiration. His neither servile nor overbearing attitude and unyielding confidence made her feel something completely different. On Carapace Island, all the demons were used to being oppressed by the 10 Kings Palace. She never thought that anyone would dare to resist. Meg closed the courtyard door and turned to enter the restaurant. He looked at Jane, who was standing at the door, and said with a smile, "Jane, you should take a nap too. Your room is upstairs. I'll bring you up." Jane responded softly. She followed Meg's arrangement and followed him upstairs. Irina was playing with Amy and Ugly Duckling in the room. Amy's bell-like laughter came from the gap of the door that wasn't closed. "You'll stay in this room." Meg pushed open a door at the other end of the corridor. It was a simple room with a single bed, a dressing table, and a window that could see the garden at the back. There was a blooming orchid on the windowsill, and there was a faint floral fragrance in the room. Jane opened her mouth, and only asked Meg after a while, I'm staying here. It's a little small, isn't it?" Meg looked at the small room that could barely fit one more person. He had no choice. This was added by the system at the last minute, and it had already shrunk the space of his study a little. If he continued to expand it, it would be against the system's rules. "No, it's not." Jane hurriedly shook her head. "You're mistaken. I don't think it's small. I just think this room is too good. I've never stayed in such a good room before. If it's not suitable for me to stay upstairs, I can also sleep on the floor downstairs." Even the floor downstairs was cleaner than where she used to stay. The most important thing was that it was safe. She felt a sense of security that she had never felt before here. Meg looked at Jane, who was a little frightened, and suddenly felt a little sorry for her. It was hard to imagine what kind of life this little girl had been living before this. "This is your room. Rest for a while. You've worked hard at noon, and you may be even busier at night," Meg said gently, and closed the door gently. "My room," Jane murmured softly. Her eyes scanned every corner of the room carefully. She reached out and pressed the edge of the bed gently. It was a soft and warm feeling. After hesitating for a while, she sat down gently on the edge of the bed. After a while, she slowly lay back on the bed. "It's so comfortable." A smile appeared on Jane's face. It was as warm and soft as if she had fallen into her mother's embrace. A drop of tear fell from the corner of her eye. If she had met Boss earlier, her mother might not have died. "This fellow. I really want to pull out his pincers and stuff them into his nagging mouth," the Abyss Demon said unhappily as he twisted his neck. "It's all right. Since that fellow wants to do business on Carapace Island, he will fall into our hands sooner or later. The spatial demon revealed a sinister smile. Chapter 1335. Let me tell you, I ate the most delicious food in my life this afternoon. Really? Which island did you go to eat alone? Bullshit, it's on our Carapace Island. Who are you trying to fool? What good food can we have on our island? It's a newly opened crayfish restaurant. The spicy crayfish tastes like heaven after eating it. With a glass of iced beer, it's simply delightful. I'm your grandfather if I'm lying to you. Yes, it's on that street. I eat crayfish restaurant. The signboard is very obvious. Sure, let's try it tonight. Oh yes, let me give you a piece of advice. Bring enough money. Don't ever think of eating without paying. That lady boss and little boss blew up a customer as a sacrifice this afternoon. So cruel. You're so fierce. Rumors about IE crayfish restaurant spread rapidly on Carapace Island. No matter if it was the mysterious and delicious crayfish or the lady boss who was as beautiful as a flower but powerful and merciless, they all successfully piqued the interest of many demons. The death of a demon was like swatting a mosquito on Carapace Island. It didn't cause much of a stir. 5 to 6 demons died in an alley in the morning. The people from the 10 Kings Palace came over to take a look, and because they didn't have any clues, they got someone to bury them, and the incident was over. The powerful demons enjoyed the fruits of exploiting the bottom-level demons and lived a life of luxury. Meanwhile, the bottom-level demons were thinking of ways to survive. Their biggest goal every month was to save enough money to buy a protective amulet, and then continue to struggle at death's door for another month. There seemed to be no end to such days. This cycle would probably only end on the day they died. However, a piece of news that was gradually spreading on the island today brought a ray of hope and light to these bottom-level demons. A restaurant called IE Crayfish Restaurant was purchasing a type of large prawn called crayfish for 50 copper coins each. This type of prawn didn't require a boat to go into the sea to catch. One only needed to search the beaches and shallow waters on Carapace Island to find plenty of them. A fisherman caught 50 crayfish in the morning and received 2,500 copper coins from the boss. To the bottom-level demons, this was undoubtedly a huge sum of money. As long as they paid 10,000 copper coins, they would be able to apply for the right to stay on the peripheral islands and receive a certain amount of protection from the demons on the island. They would be able to leave the quagmire that was Carapace Island. Therefore, many fishermen gathered at the beach of Carapace Island after the news spread in a small circle. Many of them even brought their families with them. Tea. However, looking at those fishermen who were covered in mud and those pairs of eyes that were glowing with hope, Mag walked straight up, opened the yard's door, and said to the demons, "Please send your crayfish to me. I will buy the crayfish at the price of 50 copper coins per crayfish. I will buy as many as you have." All the demons revealed surprised smiles on their faces. They were originally worried that this was a lie, but they didn't expect it to be true. This boss would really buy crayfish at the price of 50 copper coins each. Moreover, there was no limit. Those who came here all caught crayfish. Some caught dozens of crayfish, while others caught 3 to 5 crayfish. All of them could be exchanged for quite a bit of money. Under Meg's request, the demon fishermen counted the crayfish and put them into the pond one by one. Those that weren't crayfish and those that were dead were all removed by Meg. Then, he distributed the money to the fishermen according to the number of crayfish they caught. Some of the fishermen jumped up and down in excitement after receiving the money. Most of them had happy smiles on their faces. Tucker caught more than 20 crayfish during the day and received more than 100 copper coins. He couldn't help but wipe his tears as he carried the heavy money pouch. He was getting closer and closer to the hope of leaving Carapace Island with his wife. He also planned to catch crayfish during the night to gather 10,000 copper coins as soon as possible. The young fisherman, Qatar, counted the money and stuffed it into his pocket. He caught another 40 crayfish today and received 2,200 copper coins from Meg. In addition to the 2,500 copper coins in the morning, he almost received 5,000 copper coins today. He looked at Meg curiously and said, "Sir, these crayfish are prickly. How did you cook them? Are they really tasty?" The other fishermen also looked at Meg curiously. Many demons had been tricked by these crayfish today, and their hands were still numb. They really couldn't understand why this boss would spend 50 copper coins to buy these things. The restaurant is about to open for business. If you want to know, you can cook them and try them, Meg said with a smile as he turned on the tap and poured water into the pond. Because of the mud, this batch of crayfish had to be cleaned in an extra step. "Alright, then I will give it a try. I have been prickled by them dozens of times today, so I will eat them to vent my anger." Qatar nodded. He was much more confident now that he had a few thousand more copper coins in his pocket. "Sit anywhere. We will open for business at 5, Meg said with a smile. He had successfully converted another customer. Qatar sat down at the corner of the door and looked around. His gaze landed on the number plate on the table. He widened his eyes and exclaimed, 100 copper coins for a spicy crayfish. 50 copper coins for a cup of beer, 100 copper coins for a crayfish. The fishermen who hadn't left yet were all shocked. There were a few fishermen who were hesitating whether they should sit down and have dinner before continuing to gather seafood. However, they quickly stopped themselves from sitting down. Normally, they couldn't even bear to eat a meal that cost 10 copper coins outside. How could they eat a crayfish that cost 100 copper coins? The fishermen didn't expect Meg to sell the crayfish at such a high price. "Boss, you are really a good person. Let's make money together." Qatar raised his head and looked at Meg as he gave him a thumbs up. Even if those crayfish were sold at the price of 10 copper coins, these fishermen would still catch them with the greatest enthusiasm. Meg could still sell them at 100 copper coins. However, he bought them at the price of 50 copper coins, giving them a chance to make money quickly. "The purchase time tomorrow is 8 o'clock. If you still catch any crayfish, you can still send them to me," Meg said with a smile. The demon fishermen agreed with a smile. They carried their wooden buckets and nets and left excitedly. Many of them had already made up their minds to go back and bring torches to gather seafood at night. They heard that there were more crayfish at night. Chapter 1336. "Honey, don't you think my new shell is pretty?" Ivan asked Gamina excitedly as he raised both his hands, revealing his blackish-gray stone shell with a tinge of red. After eating 2 crayfish this afternoon, his shell that hadn't been changed for 5 to 6 years finally cracked and faded, replaced with this new shell. This also meant that he had successfully broken through and become a 4th-tier rock troll. The difference between 3rd tier and 4th tier seemed to be only a thin line, but it was the natural chasm between low-level demons and mid-level demons. Low-level demons would be looked down upon no matter where they were, while mid-level demons could be recruited by some demon islands and gain a recognized identity. It looks a little different from other people's 4th-tier stone shells. Could this red be because of the crayfish? Justin's new shell has this color too. Gamina had a smile in her eyes, but she didn't show it too obviously. She reached out to touch Ivan's stone shell gently, and asked in confusion. "This is a high-grade red. It looks much better than theirs," Ivan said with a smile. He was very satisfied with his stone shell. Mother's shell is also starting to crack. It must be because of the crayfish that Uncle Hades made. "Let's go eat crayfish tonight," Justin said expectantly. "Sure." Gamina nodded. Honey, you're such a cute little skr. Ivan looked at Gamina in shock. He thought he would have to spend some time persuading her, but he didn't expect Gamina to agree so readily. Gamina slapped Ivan's pouting face away, and calmly said, "Since eating crayfish can increase our strength, why should we reject it? As long as our strength increases, earning money will only get easier. Honey is wise." Ivan gave her a thumbs up in admiration, and then got up to leave. The booming business in the afternoon brought a stable source of customers to the crayfish restaurant. At the same time, the reputation that spread out also attracted some demons. The dozen or so tables in the courtyard and restaurant were filled up very quickly. Meg set up another dozen or so tables on the road at the request of the customers, and all of them were filled up. Meg walked between the three big frying pans with a big spatula in his hand. He was as calm as a martial arts expert, and his movements were smooth as flowing water as he served the spicy crayfish to the customers one by one. The spicy and refreshing crayfish, together with the frosty and delicious beer, completely ignited the atmosphere of the crayfish restaurant. This crayfish is really delicious. It's spicy and refreshing. Hiss haw. Give me 2 more. A demon took deep breaths. His lips were completely red and swollen. Although Carapace Island had a bad reputation, these demons with bad reputations seemed to have put away their evil faces in front of the delicacies. They became pure and enjoyed the delicacies at this moment. At 9 o'clock, all the crayfish were eaten, and the feast ended. Meg had collected a total of 1050 crayfish today, with an average weight of 2 caddies. This meant that he had sold 2,000 caddies of crayfish on the first day of business. I also want to keep a low profile, but my ability doesn't allow me to. Meg sighed. There was probably no other person who opened a crayfish restaurant like him. It's full. Irina placed the wooden crate that was already full on the table and revealed a satisfied smile. There was also a troublemaker tonight. She smacked it into the street with a chair, and after confiscating all its assets, the other magical beasts became very well behaved. So much money. Jane looked at the crate full of gold, silver, and copper coins. She had never seen so much money in her life, and the boss had earned it all in a day. This is only the beginning. Meg said calmly. It was only 100,000 copper coins. After deducting the cost, it was only 40,000 copper coins. With the same amount of labor, he could easily earn 300,000 to 400,000 copper coins in a day at Mamie's. Although he had earned money, he felt like he had made a loss. Jane, you have worked hard today. Clean up the table and go wash up and rest. Meg looked at the tired Jane and said. Today, she had taken on the role of the rotating axis of the entire restaurant and completed the work very well. However, this kind of labor intensity was still a bit too much for a 13-year-old girl. It's okay, I'm not tired at all. Jane shook her head, her eyes were still very bright. Compared with the fear of being in a precarious situation outside, she could not only eat delicious food in the restaurant, but also get the care of the boss and lady boss. There was also a warm and comfortable bed to rest in. This kind of hard work was nothing at all. No, it's too hard for little Goldhorn to look after. Let's recruit another employee. Irina looked at Meg and said. I'm afraid it's not easy to recruit new employees. Meg also knew that Jane was the only one supporting the restaurant, but the time they would stay here was not fixed, and they would not be stationed here for a long time. Irina thought for a moment and said, why don't I just go and grab one? Let's think about this at length. Meg smiled and said. This method was too simple and crude. After all, they were not here to colonize. It was not good to just grab an employee. After cleaning up the table, Meg let Jane rest first, and the family of 3 changed into black night clothes. "Father, where are we going?" Amy touched her black mask and asked curiously. "To catch a demon," Meg said with a smile and waved his hand. Ozzy swooped down from the sky and landed lightly on the balcony. "Are we going to kill the pig tonight?" Irina said eagerly. "Let's raise the pig for 2 more days. Our target today is not him." Meg jumped onto the back of the griffin with Amy in his arms. Irina also flew up lightly and sat behind Meg. "Then who are we going to catch today?" Irina was a little puzzled. "Simmons' lover." Meg patted Ozzy's back gently and ordered, "Ozzy, go to Flame Island." Ozzy flapped its wings and immediately rose into the sky, flying northwest. Not long after, a volcanic island appeared in Meg's sight. In the center of the island, there was an active volcano that was erupting. Red magma spewed out from the crater and flowed towards the sea from the southwest. The magma rivers were like the veins of the earth. Mist and volcanic ash shrouded the sky above the island. Before they even got close, they could already feel the unusual heat. Flame Island was originally called Lava Island. When the lava demons were at their peak, this island was one of the territories of the lava trolls. However, as the lava demons declined, the flaming demons became stronger day by day. Lava Island fell into the hands of the flaming demons and was renamed Flame Island. "It should be that island." "Ozzy, descend." Meg pointed at a small island on the sea northwest of Flame Island. Chapter 1337. "Humph, that bastard. I don't know which vixen he went to find today. He hasn't come to my place for 3 days." On the second floor of a castle built with crystal stones, Charlene, who was wearing a tulle dress, leaned against the window and looked at the burning Flame Island. She muttered with some hidden bitterness. Her enchanting figure was faintly discernible under the tulle dress. "Madam, my lord dotes on you the most. He must be too busy with something in the clan and can't take time out," a young female demon said softly. "Is that so?" Charlene smiled. Her smile was seductive and confident. Simmons was indeed unable to escape from her grasp. Although he was the chief of the flaming demon tribe, under her skirt, he was still a little brother. "Looks like this night can only belong to the 2 of us again." Charlene retracted her gaze and turned to look at the young female demon. She raised her chin slightly and coldly said, "Kneel." The purple-striped griffin circled above the island before flying sideways and landing lightly in the forest beside the crystal castle by the sea. "Ozzy, you stay here." Meg patted Ozzy's head before jumping down from the bird's back with Amy in his arms. Irina also landed lightly on the ground. She looked at Meg and asked, "Is it a bloodbath?" Tactical bloodbath." Meg nodded. This island was used by the chief of the flaming demons, Simmons, to hide his mistress. Meg had related records in the information he obtained from the Grey Temple. The mistress of this island was a demon mother, and she was also the demon that Simmons doted on the most. Simmons' wife was also a powerful 10th-tier flaming demon, and she had a family background that was not inferior to Simmons. Therefore, he could only find another place to hide his mistress outside of Flame Island. Meg and the rest's purpose of this trip was to capture that demon mother. As for the other demons, killing them was the easiest way to deal with them. The flaming demons were ranked 5th among the top 10 demon tribes. According to the information, they were very passionate about expanding their territory. They were one of the main warring factions among the demons, and were also warring factions like the Abyssal Demons. Meg had recently learned how to stop a war with a war by making the war happen among the warmongers. Assassin Xiao A ready. Amy blinked her large eyes, which were the only part of her face exposed, and raised the magic staff in her hand. Meg looked at Amy, who was dressed in black. Even though she was playing the role of an assassin, she still looked very cute. He smiled and said, "Then let's make a move. It's best if we can make Simmons think that Alfred did it. Shift the blame. I'm the best at this." Irina pulled out an enormous clear sky hammer out of nowhere. She carried it with one hand and put it on her shoulder. Then, she excitedly walked towards the crystal castle. Meg looked at Irina's domineering footsteps, and Amy, who was imitating her and carrying her magic caster's staff on her shoulder, walking in the same footsteps, and could only helplessly follow. "What demon?" a vigilant voice sounded. Bang! A muffled sound rang out, and the entire island seemed to shake. Irina dragged her hammer as she passed by. A demon had been smashed into a meat patty and was deeply embedded in a stone pit. His original appearance could no longer be seen. "Who?" Bang! "You, bang! Hurry, bang! Save, bang!" Apart from the first demon, none of the remaining demons had the time to speak a complete sentence. The military layout on this island could not be said to be weak. There were 2 9th-tier demons and a team of 10 7th-tier demons. It was clear how much Simmons doted on this lover of his. However, such a force did not stand a chance against Irina's Mjolnir at all. In a short 3 minutes, the surroundings of the crystal castle had been bathed in blood. The air was filled with the smell of blood. Meg was secretly speechless as he looked at Irina. Her clean and neat methods, the profound order in which she killed the demons, and the random large pits on the ground made these demons look like they had died in a tragic stampede. And only the porcupine battle boars of the Abyss demon tribe could cause such a large-scale stampede. She was indeed very professional at passing the buck. She should be hiding in this crystal castle. Meg looked up at the castle made of various colored crystals. Under the moonlight, it was dazzling and dreamy, just like the scenery in a dream. It should be a woman's favorite. In order to please this person, Simmons had really put in a lot of effort. What a beautiful castle. Amy's eyes lit up. Irina lowered her head and said to Amy, "Student Amy, as an emotionless killer, you must not be affected by external objects when carrying out your mission. In our eyes, this should be no different from ordinary stones." Then, she swung her hammer and smashed it on the crystal castle. Along with the sound of crystal shattering, the dreamy crystal castle suddenly collapsed. Pieces of beautiful, pure natural crystal fell to the ground and shattered into crystal fragments. 2 figures, who were only wrapped in bed sheets, fell out of the castle, and looked at Mag and Irina with a panicked expression. They were dressed in black, and there was a black mask on their faces, so it was impossible to identify who they were in this dark night. Their guards, on the other hand, had clearly been killed in the previous muffled sounds and screams. "You? Who are you? What do you want?" Charlene said nervously. Her bare feet were already bleeding from stepping on the crystal shards. Although she had extraordinary skills in seducing men, when it came to fighting, she was just a level 3 demon who didn't know magic and didn't have any fighting talent. Meg looked at Charlene. Although she was only wrapped in a bedsheet, from the snow-white long legs and sexy collarbones under the bedsheet, as well as her soft and charming face, he could see that she was a woman who could make men fall in love with her. What was even more strange was that her face seemed to be changing at any time. It was very subtle and natural. It made you feel like you could see a new face at any time, but it didn't seem abrupt. Her frowning and painful expression made people feel pity for her. They wanted to quickly take her out of the crystal fragments and love her. Is this the talent of the Ghost Mother Demon? Sure enough, it's a race that is as famous as the succubus, but rarer than the succubus. Meg thought. Other than being surprised, it didn't have much of an effect on him. The young female demon standing behind Charlene quietly held a blue leaf in her hand. A cold light flashed in her eyes, and she raised her hand to fly out. "I'll hit you." At this moment, a crisp voice sounded behind the two female fiends. A large magic caster's staff heavily knocked on the heads of the two demons. The two demons didn't even have time to make a sound before they were knocked unconscious on the ground. Killer Xiao AI, super fierce. Amy looked down at the two fallen female demons and said with a serious face. Chapter 1338. Meg, who originally wanted to say something, looked at Amy, who was blinking her eyes and looking at him expectantly as if she was saying, "Praise me, praise me." This style of sneak attack was really, perfectly inherited. He could only helplessly praise her. "Well done, little Amy. You have some of my style now." Irina nodded in satisfaction. She used the holy light to block the beautiful scene of the bedsheet falling off. Then, she walked forward and picked up the two female demons from the pile of crystal shards as if they were dead chickens. She threw them onto the beach at the side, and a layer of sand formed on them. Then, she looked at Meg and said, "What about now? Are we going to bring them away or bury them on the spot? They have no value if they're dead. Let's bring them back and lock them up first," Meg said with a smile. He broke off a big branch and wrote a line of words on the beach with messy notes. Then, he threw the branch into the sea, and it completely disappeared after the waves swept it away. "Let's go. I've already arranged a time and place with him. It's on the stone statue island that day." Meg erased their footprints and all the suspicious traces they left behind. At the same time, he added some traces and details of the abyssal demons that had been here. The three of them carried the two female demons who were wrapped up into sandballs back to Oz's position and quickly left this small island. After returning to Carapace Island, Meg locked the two female demons in a small dark room on the balcony. Amy's attack was not light, and she had yet to wake up. However, her life was not in danger. After being wrapped up in sand by Irina, the two of them had already turned into roly-poly toys. There was no need to worry about them running away even if they were thrown into the small dark room. "Are you sure Simmons will go? How do we inform Alfred? If the two of them join forces, I don't have full confidence that I can kill them both," Irina asked doubtfully as she looked at Meg who had closed the door. "Simmons has a fiery temper, and he dotes on this female demon a lot. The place where he hid his mistress was suddenly destroyed, his most trusted subordinates were all killed, and his beautiful concubine was also kidnapped. He is definitely not someone who will let things go easily. I've also made preparations for Alfred. Come with me." Meg led Irina downstairs and into the study. Soon, he came out with a black wooden carving and handed it to Irina. "This is the stone statue." Irina looked at the rough wooden carving in her hand with some surprise. She could roughly make out the appearance of a stone statue. "It's my first time doing wood carving, so I'm not very familiar with it," Meg explained awkwardly. "If it was a radish, he would have carved it better. I plan to use this to send Alfred to Stone Statue Island. It's relatively remote and is about the same distance from Flaming Island and Abyss Island. It's a good ambush point. But if they talk to each other after meeting, this plan will seem a little lame," Irina said. "I don't think they will talk to each other." Meg shook his head with a smile and handed a piece of paper to Irina. Irina looked at it seriously for a while, and her eyes lit up. She looked up at Meg with some surprise and said, "Not bad. I didn't expect you to know how to use schemes now. Bold but not astute. That's not a good word." Meg spread his hands. This was a very simple way to sow discord. However, without the support of a powerful force like Irina, it would not be so simple. He asked Amy to burn half of the wooden carving with fire. Then, he used the burnt wood to write a line of words on a stone and tied the two together. Meg went out alone and rowed on Oz to Abyss Island. From above the abyss, he accurately dropped the wooden carving into the hall in the middle of the abyss. If the information was correct, that hall belonged to Alfred. The griffin disappeared from the sky above Abyss Island in the blink of an eye. The stone statue that was tied to a burning red meteorite smashed through the roof of the hall, breaking the silence of the abyss. Simmons, you've gone too far. Alfred stood in the middle of the hall and crushed the stone and wooden carving. He looked up at the roof that was smashed through and gritted his teeth. His red eyes flashed with a crazy murderous intent. Anyone who tried to touch the power of the stone statue would have to die. Alfred, fuck you. On the small island, Simmons, whose body was burning with raging flames, roared into the sky. The flames that swept out melted the crystals. He had only come half an hour later than usual to satisfy the yellow-faced woman at home. He did not expect the entire island to be bathed in blood, and Charlene was nowhere to be found. On the Demon Islands, only the porcupine battle boar could leave such footprints. Moreover, it had to be Alfred's porcupine battle boar that could make the level 9 flaming demon powerless. Simmons, lend this woman to me for 2 days. Come to West Point Island the day after tomorrow to collect her. I'll wait for you. Looking at the messy handwriting on the beach, Simmons could almost imagine Alfred's ugly face. This damn bastard actually dared to kill his subordinate so arrogantly and snatch his woman. Damn bastard. Aren't you just worried that I'll steal your position as the Marshal of the Allied Forces? Let me see who will die in whose hands. Simmons gritted his teeth and jumped onto a giant black beast. The remaining small island was engulfed in a sea of fire. Together with the crystal castle, it turned into ashes. The morning sun shone in through the gap in the curtains and landed on Jane's face. Jane frowned slightly and then suddenly opened her eyes. At the same time, she sat up on the bed and reached out to grab the stone at the head of the bed. However, this time, she touched nothing. There was only a small moving alarm clock at the head of the bed. Jane was stunned for a moment. She looked at the furnishings in the room and then came back to her senses. She was no longer living in the cave at the edge of the cliff. Instead, she was living in a safe and comfortable room and sleeping on a big soft bed. However, what happened yesterday was too surreal. It was like an unreal dream. She reached out and pinched her thigh. She grimaced in pain and immediately woke up. So it wasn't a dream. It was so comfortable to sleep. Jane raised her hands and stretched. After waking up, all the fatigue in her body disappeared. It wasn't like sleeping on the stone where her whole body would hurt the next day. Oh yes, I should get up and work. Jane hurriedly got off the bed and folded the thin blanket carefully before opening the door and going out. Jane, why are you up so early? There's no need to operate in the morning. You can sleep in. Meg had just finished washing up and said to Jane with a smile. It was only 6:00 in the morning. He was used to waking up early, and his biological clock woke him up automatically. However, Jane had nothing to do since she woke up so early. I've already slept enough. I've never slept so well. Jane shook her head and looked at Meg. Boss, is there anything I can do? For example, washing clothes or something. I can do anything. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.